candidate who's got, less than 5%, probably around 5, that's simply a bad political decision to make, getting on a stage with someone who literally cannot beat you, but will spend the entire debate, as he did in the last one, attacking you over and over and over.
Right. Well, that sounds like Donald Trump's argument, Jeannie. Are we done with old-fashioned debates, or is this just a symptom of this cycle?
I think it's a symptom of this cycle. I hope it is. I know people who are going to attend that debate, young people, I should say, their first presidential primary debate. They were excited to do that in New Hampshire. It's been taken away from them. Even Trump supporters have said that they do wish he was on that stage just so they could see him. That said, I think Nikki Haley, if I was advising her, I would say it's the right decision. She got a lot of support coming out of those first, 3-4 debates. But quite frankly, in that last debate, she didn't really help herself that much. And it doesn't make a lot of sense for her to go there and get beat up by Ron DeSantis, who's essentially doing Trump's dirty work. Because the thing to keep in mind is that what Donald Trump, as conciliatory as he was the few minutes after the Iowa win, 6 hours later, he was taking to Truth Social, calling her Nimrata, and he was also showing these pictures of her morphing into Hillary Clinton. He is going to say, even if she wins big in New Hampshire, she isn't winning amongst Republicans. She's winning on the backs of independents and the big bad media, and he is going to attack her for that. So this is what she is facing. She needs to debate him, not Ron DeSantis, and she knows that.
What did he call her?
I shouldn't repeat it. Nimrata.
Nimrod. That's a new one. I haven't. Gosh, we're testing out new names, I guess, for Donald Trump. What do you make of this sort of last-minute framing here, Rick? This is the way he turned on Vivek Ramaswamy going into Iowa. Not that he's had nice things to say about his former ambassador, but some think that she might even be vying for a vice presidential role here. Does that still remain a possibility?
I've never met a presidential candidate in 40 years who conducted their campaign in order to be the vice presidential candidate, especially at this point where you've crossed so many bridges and you've spent so much money and you've committed so much of your time. You're looking for that brass ring. And at this point, everybody in this race believes they have a way to get it. And so I think all of that is just chatter. I would say on the name thing, let's just be totally clear. This was a birther attack on Nikki Haley by Donald Trump on Truth Social. It's her first name. He misspelled it, which may have been intentional. And he's trying to draw people's attention to her ethnic heritage. And it's exactly what he did to Barack Obama. And it should be absolutely deplored because it is a way to interject racism into the New Hampshire campaign.
Well, that seems to be a familiar place for him here, Jeannie. How does that play in New Hampshire?
Hopefully it doesn't play well anywhere. It's an ugly, ugly thing that he has done and he continues to do. I hope that the New Hampshire voters and voters across the country see it for the racist statement that it is. It's an ugly thing to say. But the reality is these things have only helped Donald Trump with the MAGA base. And unfortunately for Republicans, the MAGA base is pretty much where the party is now. We only need to look at the fact that senators and House members of the House keep endorsing him because they feel that they are threatened to be challenged. And so again, a win in New Hampshire for her, unless she finds a way back into that Republican fold, a win on the backs of independents and Democrats, or even one he can describe that way, is going to make it very difficult for her to go forward. She can go forward, but it's going to make it difficult for her. And let's not forget, Nikki Haley was endorsed in her gubernatorial race by Mitt Romney and Sarah Palin. She was able to cross that. So if anybody can do it, it's her. But it is a tough thing to do in the face of a president who's really should be seen as an incumbent and who really is willing to play dirty as he moves forward. She's up to the challenge, but it is a big challenge for anybody to meet.
You guys forced me onto Truth Social. I'm looking at this picture morphing her face into Hillary Clinton. It says Haley with the old Clinton logo, and you got the Clinton pantsuit going here. It's nightmare fuel. I can't look away from it. That's so bizarre. Rick Davis, what's going on inside Nikki Haley headquarters right now as they try to take advantage of these remaining days?
Well, for her, the focus is much like where they were in Iowa at this point. The final sort of pitch, she's pushing the electability and how she can beat Biden in a way that's significantly better for the GOP than the claims of victory by Donald Trump. And they're worried about turnout, right? I mean, there was a huge decrease in turnout in Iowa because of the storm, probably, but certainly that's a good way to blame it. But almost 80,000 out of the 110,000, I mean, the difference between them, 70,000 people fewer showed up in Iowa. And they need a turnout. They need people showing up. It's pretty clear a low turnout helps Donald Trump. His base is going to come no matter what. And so I know that they're looking at sort of how do they deliver that vote. And in a primary, arguably it's a little easier. Without the incredibly cold weather, it should be easier. And so this is going to be a test really of whether or not she can take the momentum that she has, drive into the final weekend of the election and identify her voters to turn out.
He knows because he's been there and he's done it. Rick Davis, great analysis, along with Jeannie Shanzano, both of whom will be with us in New Hampshire. And I'll tell you what, we're heading there this weekend. Wonder if we'll get back home from there. At least it won't be quite as cold, as Rick said, and we'll have special coverage straight through the process, the day of, the primary day, and the day after here on Bloomberg Sound On. We're going to have a lot more ahead on what's going on in Washington. We haven't even had a chance to touch it yet, but an important meeting today at the White House that could lead, some say, to a breakthrough on the border, or maybe it will remind us that this is as elusive as we thought. We'll do that after we check world and national news. Dan Schwartzman has that from the newsroom in New York. Hi, Dan.
Hey, Joe. President Biden has made the decision to reclassify the Houthi militants as a specially designated global terrorist organization. In the final days of his administration, Donald Trump had labeled the Houthis as a terrorist organization, only to have Biden revoke the designation early in his term. The Houthis have been firing missiles and harassing commercial ships transiting the Red Sea as a way to protest Israel's invasion of the Gaza Strip. Now, according to reports, the Biden administration can rescind the designation if the Houthis stop attacking ships. The move to reclassify will take effect in 30 days. Later this afternoon, and as Joe just spoke about, President Biden will be hosting congressional leaders at the White House. The aim is to get fresh aid to Ukraine as soon as possible. Bloomberg's Amy Morris reporting from Washington.
The meeting will include Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, House Speaker Mike Johnson, and other committee chairs. It will focus on Biden's supplemental funding for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. Hardline Republicans balked at the $61 billion request for Ukraine aid in particular, which has become a sticking point in broader talks on federal spending and border security. The issue is particularly difficult for Johnson, whose tenuous grasp on the speakership could be at risk if he pushes for Ukraine aid. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Thanks, Amy. Boeing moving one step closer to ungrounding its 737 MAX 9 jets. Operators of the plane completing inspections on an initial batch of 40 jets. The FAA will next review the findings of the inspections to determine whether the Boeing drafted procedures are enough to return the 171 parked MAX 9s back to service. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Dan Schwartzman, and this is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We've got the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ continuing to trade in the red. Again, S&P down 47 points at 47.18, a drop now of 1%. Dow Industrials down 191 points, a decline of 0.5%, while NASDAQ lower now by 182 points, a drop there of 1.2%. 10-year yield 4.11%. We have got the 2-year now yielding 4.36%. Gold down $26, the ounce holding just above 2,000 now at 2,002, a decline right now of 1.3%. West Texas Intermediate crude 72.19 a barrel, a drop there of 0.3%. So stocks joining losses in risk assets as bond yields climb on bets that the Fed will be in no rush to cut rates as the economy shows signs of strength. The World Economic Forum underway in Davos, and Bloomberg Radio is there. This morning we caught up with Cristiano Amon, the president and CEO of Qualcomm. He talked about a number of issues, including doing business amid tensions between Washington and Beijing.
Any company that has a leading technology product and is a product that becomes very important for the digital transformation of many industries, such as automotive and others, you're going to have a big business in China. It's just a function of GDP.
And you can hear more of that conversation on the Surveillance podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts, and Bloomberg Terminal users can find plenty of Davos coverage under NI Davos. Again, recapping, stocks lower, S&P down 47, down now by 1%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
The lead Republican negotiator on the border issue, this grand deal that they've been working on, says they want to get the text out this week, but it's been held up by technical things. James Lankford talking to CNN, ever hopeful that something emerges here, but boy, it's pretty hard to see this happening with the House suggesting that it's dead on arrival. Speaker Mike Johnson is going to be sitting down today with Joe Biden. This meeting in the cabinet room starts a little over an hour from now. And the stakes are high as we read on the terminal Biden-Johnson meet as pressure grows for border Ukraine deal. Remember, they're tied. The president wants $60 billion for Ukraine, but it's not going to happen for Republicans unless they get a deal on the border. And by the way, a lot of Democrats want that too, just like a lot of Republicans want money for Ukraine. But it's gotten bogged down into this debate that some are hoping might get new life today in this meeting. Then again, the whole thing could fall apart. We heard earlier today from Speaker Mike Johnson ahead of the meeting with Joe Biden. Here he is.
We need to know that Ukraine would not be another Afghanistan. And you see a lot of the American people scratching their heads, having real questions about why that would continue without these appropriate answers. So I'm going to push for those. But before we even talk about Ukraine, I'm going to tell the president what I'm telling all of you, and we've told the American people: border, border, border. We have to take care of our own house. We have to secure our own border before we talk about doing anything else. And that's the message I've had since day one. It's the message we'll continue to have. And I think that's the message the American people want us to deliver.
Border, border, border. Border, border. That's the meeting. I suppose Ukraine will come up. Interesting who's invited here and who is not. I don't see any of the negotiators at the table. Sinema, Lankford. Is Mayorkas dropping by? Doubt it. As we reassemble the panel with Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributors. Jeannie, is this a meeting that helps or hurts the situation?
You know, I think I'm always in favor of talking. I think they should have talked and been at the White House, or the White House, the president met with them somewhere else much sooner. Johnson is right to this extent. We need to keep our house in order. The border is a mess. It needs to be taken care of. And Democrats have been saying that. Let's not forget, Joe Biden gave a border bill his first day in office. So there is no question. But we can do both. We can both have a supplemental aid package that is also desperately needed and we can secure our own border. We are the United States of America. And by the way, I would say to the speaker, as we think about keeping our house in order, that also pertains to the budget. Let's not run our country on CRs as we're going to continue to do right now. So he's right about that, but he's got to look internally and look at his own caucus to say who is holding a lot of this up.
Rick, some have suggested that Joe Biden would not have invited the leaders over. Chuck Schumer will be there too, unless he had something to offer Republicans. They've thought maybe he'd come to the table with something for a deal, for instance, on parole. Does he need something to show for this meeting?
You know, look, I mean, he's going to give the college try to convince these guys that Ukraine is in an incredibly important period of time in the war. I'm sure he'll address the significant distinctions between Ukraine and Afghanistan, something that I honestly have not heard up until the speaker throwing that out there today. And I would just remind the speaker, I know he listens to our show every day, that, you know, if the Russians invade and are successful in taking over Ukraine, he's going to have something that will make Afghanistan look like a piece of cake, full-on war with NATO and Europe.
Wow.
So the reality of this is Biden's best chance to make a case for that. And if he has to talk about border in the process, he will. But the White House has been a little bit immune to talks on the border. They haven't really fully engaged. They haven't tried to move their caucus closer to a deal. So I don't think today is as much about the border as Speaker Johnson would like it to be, but probably a lot about why we need the support for Ukraine at this critical stage of the war.
Well, Jeannie, knowing that Speaker Johnson is likely listening right now, do you suspect that the strategy at the White House is to not give him an exit plan, but to scare him into funding Ukraine? Rick Davis just scared me.
Yeah, that's what they've been trying to do. The problem, though, is they are talking to the speaker, and this is not only a new speaker, but an incredibly powerless speaker. I mean, look at when we said narrow majority, when we were at 4, look now. We've got Scalise out for surgery. We have another representative out because of a car accident. We have Bill Johnson leaving on the 21st. We're down to like a 218 Republican vote, a 217 shortly. He has zero room to maneuver. So, you know, the White House can talk till they're blue in the face to the speaker, but does he have the ability to bring his caucus along? When we think about the border, you have the Republicans versus the Republicans in the Senate, the remaining of them, like Mitch McConnell, who want a deal, and you have Republicans in the House who are saying absolutely not, HR2 or bust. These people who are willing to shut down the government over that. So the president can make this case about Ukraine. I'm not sure it's going to be heard if it's made to Johnson.
Wow. Let's get into the shutdown for a minute. Important to note, the Senate did vote to advance a continuing resolution late yesterday. Stopgap moves ahead 68-13. This is another ladder. It would fund the government through March 1st and 18th. This is not the full-blown deal. They think they'll pass this tomorrow, but the procedural vote was a success. Speaker Johnson, though, is going to have to move this bill under suspension of rules. If it's going to happen, that would require 2/3. Rick, where are we on this? Or are we going to have another CR?
You know, it's been surprisingly quiet for the last few days since Speaker Johnson announced his support for a short-term CR, especially from our rabble-rousers in the Freedom Caucus. So I think he probably has a deal that'll stick. Certainly he'll get support from the Democrats for this, and I believe the Senate's going to try and kick it to him on Thursday. So we'll know before the Congress is out on Friday that we've got a deal on the CR.
Is that a done deal, Jeannie, so they can focus on the border in Ukraine?
It's a done deal, but the question is, how much does it impact Mike Johnson's ability to keep his job? Quite frankly, he's going to be doing this on the backs of Democrats. That's never something that the Freedom Caucus welcomes. And of course, are they then going to stymie him moving forward? Again, I repeat, he is down to like no margin for error. This is the closest partisan divide in the House in American history, and we are incredibly polarized. So do the math as to what they can do going forward.
No margin for error, no room for error in the House, for sure, and no room on the clock. Although I will tell you, the optimism that Rick Davis says things haven't been too noisy. Look at they've got all the cable news networks up on the wall here. None of them have a countdown clock to a shutdown. That's got to mean something, right? Some final thoughts from our panel straight ahead. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano on the fastest show in politics. This is Bloomberg.
Your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Amazon will partner with Diamond Sports as part of a restructuring agreement as the largest owner of regional sports networks looks to emerge from bankruptcy. Diamond owns 18 networks under the Bally Sports banner. Amazon shares down now by 1.8%. Microsoft is opening up its artificial intelligence assistant to consumers and making the corporate version available to smaller companies as it tries to increase the number of paying customers for the new services. Dan Ives of Wedbush Securities told Bloomberg Surveillance this morning this is a big deal for Microsoft.
When you put it together, this is going to be 800 billion to $1 trillion of incremental value to the Microsoft story. I mean, they are leading the AI revolution with Nadella and Redmond, along with the godfather of AI, Jensen, NVIDIA. I think the monetization that's happening at Microsoft is still so underappreciated in terms of what we're seeing in the field.
And you can hear more of that conversation on the Surveillance podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. Ives does have an outperform rating on the stock, along with a $450 price target. Microsoft down now by 0.7%, now at $387.45. Verizon Communications is writing down the value of its business services division by $5.8 billion, a sign of the company's declining enterprise operations. The company says in a filing the decline is tied to the telecom's giant's legacy operations.
You're listening to Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
We're live from World Headquarters in New York on the fastest show in politics just for one day. Kaylee Lyons will be on the way from Washington in 5 minutes after we update world and national news. Dan Schwartzman has that from the Bloomberg newsroom here in New York. Hi, Dan.
Hey, Joe, maybe for one day, but we're glad to have you here in New York alongside us. But I'll tell you, Judge Lewis Kaplan has threatened Donald Trump with expulsion from his courtroom. The former president repeatedly ignoring Kaplan's warnings to keep quiet as writer E. Jean Carroll testified in the federal court trial to determine damages, if any, Trump would owe her for remarks made back in June of 2019. A jury had previously found that Trump sexually abused Carroll back in 1996, then defamed her in October of 2022 when denying her claims. Judge Kaplan also angering Trump by refusing to adjourn the trial on Thursday so he could go to his mother-in-law's funeral. After weeks of attacks on Red Sea shipping, the U.S. is putting the Houthi militant group back on its list of global terrorists. Bloomberg's Nathan Hager reporting from Washington.
This move is a reversal for President Biden. He took the Houthis off the list of specially designated global terrorists early in his presidency to try to ease the humanitarian crisis in Yemen after years of civil war. But this recent string of Red Sea attacks tied to the war in Gaza has changed the game for the White House. A senior administration official says the designation will take effect in 30 days. That's to give the U.S. time to shape sanctions on the Houthis that won't harm ordinary Yemenis. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
Thanks, Nathan. The Wall Street Journal reporting that cancer rates in the U.S. for many common cancers, including prostate, melanoma, and breast cancer, are all on the rise. Another worrying sign is that colorectal cancer in those under 55 years old is increasing as well. While the news isn't good on cancer prevention, the silver lining is that cancer death rates have dropped by a third since 1991. The reasons given for the decline in deaths is earlier detection, better treatment, and declines in the number of smokers. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Dan Schwartzman, and this is Bloomberg. Back to you, Joe.
I appreciate it, Dan. With our panel, some final thoughts. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us as Jamie Dimon points to the deplorables. This is important as we head for the next stop here on the campaign trail and what appears to be a serious amount of momentum here for Donald Trump. Some folks think he's already got the nomination in the bag, as we've been discussing. Remembering this was one of the huge errors that Hillary Clinton made, referring to Trump supporters as deplorables, saying it out loud, knowing that she had little respect for millions of people around the country who supported Donald Trump. Speaking to CNBC, Jamie Dimon, of course, JP Morgan Chase CEO, saying Democrats should grow up and listen to supporters of the president. Quote, when people say MAGA, they're actually looking at people voting for Trump and basically scapegoating them, he said. I don't like how Trump said things about Mexico, but he was not wrong about some of these critical issues, and that is why they're voting for him. Rick Davis, is there some truth to this?
Yeah, I've never understood a campaign that attacks the voters and not the candidate. And I think that they would get more success if they actually gave a lifeline to voters and said, some of these policies you like, we actually can accomplish based on our point of view.
How about it, Jeannie? The deplorables are back.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to understand where people in the country are, and they have been screaming that since Donald Trump won in 2016. We all have to do a better job listening as to what they are facing, and the Democrats have to say, this is how we can do a better job helping to meet you where you are. Democrats haven't done that well, hence their numbers across the country.
Joe Biden posted on Twitter, looks like Donald Trump just won Iowa. He's the clear front runner on the other side at this point. Goes on to write, here's the thing. This election was always going to be you and me versus extreme MAGA Republicans. It was true yesterday. It'll be true tomorrow. Is that the wrong message for him to send, Rick?
Yeah, I don't know why he's getting into the Republican primary. I mean, what sitting president wants to actually insert himself into an opposition party primary?
How about
Thought
that?
it was nuts.
Great conversation, and great to have them both back. I'm glad you're both home. Rick Davis, Jeannie Shanzano. I'll meet you back here tomorrow, our signature panel on Bloomberg Sound On. I'm Joe Matthew at World Headquarters in New York. As I mentioned, Kayleigh comes in next. We're going to spend time with Maya McGinnis as we stare down just days now to a possible government shutdown. Hour 2 starts now.
Now, from our nation's capital, this is Bloomberg Sound On.
Two major stories that we're following here developing before our eyes.
What does it say about Trump's influence on the Republican Party?
What can the Biden administration do on its own to support Israel?
Bloomberg Sound On. Politics, policy, and perspective from D.C.'s top names.
The Republican caucus is at war with itself.
Members of Congress would have a press conference every day if somebody would cover that.
There is bipartisan support for Israel.
This is one of the big ones we only see once every decade or 2 decades in the Middle East.
Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
Just 3 days to a possible government shutdown, which means no room for error on Capitol Hill. Welcome to Hour 2 of Sound On. As the Senate moves on a short-term plan here, leaders head to the White House for a meeting on the border and funding for Ukraine about 1 hour from now. We're joined ahead by Maya McGinnis. So the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget will also weigh in on a more than $70 billion tax deal that appears to be at hand in Congress. Joining from the nation's capital, where I should also be, is my partner, Kayleigh Lines. Kayleigh, it looks like, first of all, welcome home. We could get some news today coming out of the White House, even as we wait for a potential shutdown to be resolved on Friday. This is about border Ukraine and some, stories we've been talking about here for weeks.
Yeah, really 2 buckets of funding in question here, Joe. Obviously, on the one hand, you need to keep the government funded somehow. Looks like we're going to punt the ball again with a 2-step laddered continuing resolution. On the other hand, the supplemental funding request from the White House. What is the White House and Senate Democrats willing to give on the border in order to secure funding for Ukraine? And maybe we're going to get closer to an answer to that question this afternoon, Joe.
You said it. You don't look exhausted at all. I hope you're feeling okay. Everyone should know.
I slept in this morning. It was lovely.
That's amazing in itself. Kayleigh got back to the nation's capital, I think in the wee hours, sharing the aircraft with a series of lawmakers. We don't have to name names here, but the point is everyone's still trying to get back from Des Moines, and I guess we'll see them all again coming up this weekend in New Hampshire.
Yeah, hopefully our travel luck will be better on the second leg of this primary journey, Joe.
Honestly, I've tried them all, trains, planes, and automobiles, and I'm not there yet. We've got a lot ahead. Maya's going to come in. We'll talk to Maya a little bit later. Nancy Cook, too, on the campaign trail, where apparently we're done with the debates. Kayleigh, Nikki Haley says she's out.
Yeah, and ABC has canceled it as a result, because otherwise it would just be Ron DeSantis talking to himself.
I feel like that would have been fun. Ron DeSantis versus 2 empty chairs. I mean, how surreal would that have been?
He said he would do it.
Empty chair debates. 2 empty chairs would be. I know he would, but I don't think that would have worked well for the TV producers. Either way, we've got a lot to talk about. It's great to see Kayleigh back. Let's first look at Wall Street before we bring in Maya McGinnis. Charlie Pellet has that for us from here in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there, Joe Matthew. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the red right now. Stocks are joining losses in risk assets. Bond yields are climbing on speculation that the Fed will be in no rush to cut rates as the economy shows signs of resilience. S&P now down 41, a decline of 0.9%. The Dow down 168, down 0.5 now. NASDAQ down 171, a drop of 1.1%. 10-year yield at 4.10% with a 2-year that's now yielding 4.38%. Gold down $23 the ounce at $2,005, a drop of 1.1%. West Texas Intermediate crude higher, little changed, up 1 cent now, 72.41 a barrel. Bank of Israel Governor Amir Yaron says a negative demand shock in the wake of the war against Hamas has caused inflation to slow faster than anticipated. Bloomberg Radio caught up with Yaron this morning at the World Economic Forum in Davos.
The war is costing us
us directly. And this is give or take about 10% of GDP and another 2% in sort of lost revenue.
And you can hear more of the conversation on the Surveillance podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcast. And of course, Bloomberg Terminal customers can always find plenty of Davos coverage under NI Davos. The U.S. government has unveiled a long-awaited regulation that could slash the biggest banks' overdraft fee income by as much as $3.5 billion each year. Bank shares trading lower today along with the rest of the market. We've got JP Morgan Chase now trading lower by just about 0.5%. Citigroup shares down 1.3%. Bank of America down 1.1%. Wells Fargo now lower by 0.3%. Recapping stocks lower, S&P down 42, a drop now of 0.9%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charlie, we thank you. As always, find us on the radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube. Right now, we'll meet you in the studio if you search Bloomberg Global News. From World Headquarters in New York, I'm Joe Matthew. Kaylee Lines is in Washington, D.C. What's the mood going to be like? 3:15, the cabinet room, Kaylee. Are they putting out grinders? Is this like a sandwiches and ice water kind of meeting? Are they bringing out like the nice stuff for Speaker Mike Johnson? Because there could be some tension in the air.
Yeah, there definitely could. I don't know about the kind of nice stuff. I would imagine it's not, lamb medallions like at the White House Christmas party we got to attend. Considering the stakes in the game that's being played here, this idea that the president and even Republican Senate leaders like Mitch McConnell, who's one of the big four that are going to be there, desperately want to get aid for Ukraine through and are probably finding themselves pretty frustrated with the reticence on the part of the House and at least maybe willing to make a deal with the House on the border. I guess it's just a question of how hard a line Mike Johnson is going to want to walk here.
That's true, and it's all happening against the backdrop of this funding debate. I'm guessing we're not shutting down, Kaylee. I was making the point last hour. We've got all the screens up on the wall here. You and I don't always have that in Washington, but all the the TV screens are up here in the big fishbowl studio.
Yeah, you're in the fancy studio.
Well, yours is pretty fancy too, but still, I don't see any countdown clocks anywhere. Nobody's taking this seriously, or I guess we're just bored with it. I don't know. Maybe we're always about to shut down. It's like a nightmare for Miami
this is
Guinness.
The third time we've found ourselves in this situation, isn't it?
Exactly.
And we might find ourselves again in early March.
That's true. That's the new ladder, right? March 1, March 8, assuming this thing passes. The Senate got their procedural vote done last night. 68-13, pretty encouraging. So I guess we're going to figure this out. The question is, will we ever have a real budget? Something we've asked Maya McGinnis before. She's president of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. And Maya, it's great to have you back. Are you encouraged by no countdown clocks, or is it just me?
Right, we don't want to keep counting down and seeing that nothing happens. But on the other hand, how discouraging it is that this has just become normal and that it's all for show. So we're going to kick the can again. We are, by the time we start to deal with the next moment where decisions have to be made, we will almost be halfway through the fiscal year. And if you're actually thinking about how the budget process is supposed to work, it's just a few weeks from now that the president is supposed to be submitting his budget for the next fiscal year. We haven't even begun to deal with this fiscal year. So it's all too routine a reminder of just how broken we are. And yeah, I guess we're tired of the drama. But it doesn't mean that it's any less dysfunctional than it has been the entire time.
Yeah, Maya, the timeline is all out of whack here. But just on the timeline, is the real deadline that we're going to be dealing with April when that sequester kicks in, the 1% cuts across the board, including for defense?
I think there are a number of moments where they are action forcing in one way or another because there's always something that if not enough people go along with, there will be real consequences. So I do think that March deadline absolutely matters, but we are still kind of skirting around what the specific funding levels will be. And if we hit that sequester moment, then we know what they will be. And so I think that's always been an important date. But right now, my belief is we will start to have whatever funding bills are able to pass, that they will be done by the beginning of March. And then the tricky thing will be, how do you figure out what to do with the rest of the government, the pieces they couldn't pass in individual appropriations? Will it look like a big Christmas tree omnibus with lots of things hidden inside of it? Or will it just be a CR, maybe at the sequester level or somewhere around there?
Yeah, we've heard the idea of a year-long CR floated. I could almost hear you. Your ears must have been burning, Maya. We're talking about a tax deal as well, though, and it's interesting that we're trying to tweak revenue even though we can't seem to figure out a budget here. But Chuck Schumer's endorsed this new tax compromise that's coming from Jason Smith and Ron Wyden, Ways and Means Chair, Senate Finance Chair. I'm going to let everyone know right now that Kayleigh is going to be interviewing Jason Smith on Balance of Power later. He's going to be the man of the moment. This would pair an expansion of the child tax credit, Maya, with more corporate-friendly tax policy. Is that a wash in your mind? Where's the committee on this?
Yeah, so first, let me agree with the point that you just made, that really we should pass budgets before we do a lot of policies that would normally be a part of budgets. I had some folks from other countries in here the other day asking me about how our budget process works, and they just didn't get it. They were like, you don't have a budget, but you still pass policies, spending, taxes. How does that work? And I could not give them a good answer. So I wish we did this in a normal sequence. On this specific deal, there's really both very, very good things and some discouraging things. On the good side, these folks who I didn't think would come up with a deal necessarily were able to come up with a tax deal that is pretty much offset or paid for. And one of the goals from a fiscal perspective is how do we rebuild that muscle memory that if something is worth doing, whether it's a spending increase or a tax cut, you also have to figure out how you're going to pay for it. You should borrow during emergencies, borrow during recessions, but normal times, you've got to pay for things. And so they do use some offsets that actually bring the policies back down to where they are paid for. So that's the way a compromise can and should work. Nonetheless, there's still some gimmicks. One of them is that these are only temporary tax extensions, both on the business side and the child tax credit side. They're sensible policies. They make sense that they're brought together, but they're going to expire in 2025. And this whole thing of let's put in place policies that we want to be permanent, but we'll just make them temporary to shrink the price tag, that doesn't work. And if you actually you estimate the overall costs, making this permanent or in a 10-year window, you're looking at upwards of $500 billion. So there is a big price tag here if we tackle this comprehensively.
So for that reason, do you not think this deal, which has not yet been written into legislation, should be passed by Congress?
You know, I think this is a one hand or the other for real for me. I think I'm very supportive of the fact that it is paid for and that the chairman went through that work of figuring out where the offsets are. And they're not all gimmicks at all, which we often see just made up things. They're real pay fors and they're decent policies. They make sense. I think I would go ahead with this bill, and then we're going to have 2025 to figure out all of the tax policies, which will be expiring, all of the Trump tax cuts, many of which both Republicans and Democrats want to extend, but lots of people are rightfully saying you can only do so if you pay for them. But I hope on the budget process front, we will, yes, get in the habit of paying for things like they do here, but stop the habit of making things just for 1 or 2 years, which adds to the uncertainty. And some cynics would say adds to the fundraising capabilities of people on various committees because you have tax lobbyists always pushing for those things to be extended. I don't think that's the right way to make policy.
Can't imagine such things in Washington. As we spend time with Maya McGinnis from the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. It's a big meeting at the White House today that we've been talking about. Maya, not about this budget specifically, but the request, the supplemental request that the president made for Ukraine that also now has been sort of linked with this potential deal on the border. I was joking earlier with Kayleigh about the way the president may or may not handle this. Remember back in 2012 when Barack Obama had John Boehner over and he served hoagies, he served sandwiches, and it was supposed to be some huge insult that he didn't break out the White House china. What's the reception? What's the strategy today from the White House as they try to get into the speaker's head the stakes around Ukraine?
Well, this is a really complicated and interesting negotiation, both because the policies are immensely complicated. The foreign aid, not so much, but coupling it with border security, obviously a huge issue, one of the biggest issues in the country and not easy to solve. And they're really working on deep policy there. But also you have very complicated politics where many of the folks, including, I believe, I've been told the speaker does support a number of these aid packages, but they have to deal with some of their conference members who do not. I think if you let any of these things stand on their own, there'd be enough support to pass them, whether it's Israel, Ukraine, even the border, depending on what the specifics look like. And so it's a complicated sort of coalition of ideas and people to build here. I hope and I believe that they are working on building trust in this because each one of those leaders also has a very complicated constituency that they have to sell the deal to. But I think they're more unified, and that it would be good to get these things done. And again, to show a little bit of optimism, I think they're going to. I've said that to a number of groups of people, and they've rolled their eyes at me. And it may be that the deal just implodes on its own weight. But I believe there's enough support for all elements of the package that they will be able to get something done.
Wow.
Well, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell seems to be wanting to move forward. He's speaking to reporters right now and has just told them that he expects the Senate will act on the Ukraine supplemental next week. So I guess trying to set a bit of a timeline here as they try to come to a compromise. Obviously, what the Senate wants and what the House wants here, Maya, probably a little bit different, as there are many in the House advocating for greater fiscal restraint, would not like to see this kind of spending going to Ukraine. The thing is, though, in the actual appropriations process, as you have rightly pointed out to us many times, the pile of money we're talking about here, the actual programs that could be cut, is a very, very small part of the spending of the U.S. government. Entitlements are a massive issue. And I bring this up because Joe Matthew is actually currently in a TV ad by the Trump administration because he talked to Nikki Haley about this months ago. And she said, yeah, we have to lift the retirement age above 65. And she's getting kind of crucified for it, Maya. So does this just indicate that that actual entitlement conversation, that huge line item when it comes to U.S. spending, is not going to be a ball that can be touched for this entire election year?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think one of the most important in terms of how things play out in this election. And so it is without question the truth that Social Security has to be reformed. This is a program that will become insolvent in roughly a decade, and there will be across the board 23% benefit cuts for everybody, people who depend on the program. There are so many ways to fix this program. You can means test, you can cut benefits, you can raise the retirement age, you can raise the payroll tax cap or the payroll tax rate. There are so many different solutions. The one thing that we should not be arguing about is whether we have to make those changes. The truth is that we have waited for decades more than we should have. We could have made the changes in a much easier manner if we'd acted more quickly. And I think it's just the truth that when you have a candidate like Nikki Haley saying, we need to look at raising the retirement age down the road for much younger workers, that is somebody who is leveling with the American people about what kinds of choices there are. There's no one option. We can disagree on what they should be. But anybody who's saying, I'm not going to touch that program, is doing a huge disservice to voters and not telling people. And the reason I kind of want to be so strong in this, and I'm a political independent and we're nonpartisan, but it is really easy to pretend that you will do nothing and that is protecting people. When it comes to Social Security, that's just not true. We need actual answers, and we need leaders who are willing to talk about what changes they support in order to fix the program. I think Social Security right now is the political issue that both parties are trying to pretend the other party is going to, slash benefits, trying to scare people. And it's really a short-term political strategy that's reckless in terms of protecting the program. And it deeply concerns me that we're so caught up in those politics.
All right, Maya, thank you so much for joining us. That's Maya McGinnis there. She's president of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. She thinks this is an issue that needs to be talked about, but I'm not sure how much Nikki Haley's going to be wanting to talk about this issue in the next few days as she is running the sprint toward the finish line of that New Hampshire primary.
That's right. And I've noticed, by the way, they're doing local news stories on that ad, and I'm guessing we're going to see that a lot while we're up there. This may be something we can't touch till after the election. With Kaylee Lines in Washington, I'm Joe Matthew in New York. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Job cuts at Germany's Bayer. It says it has agreed with employee groups on a plan to cut a significant number of positions as the company looks to streamline operations and improve its performance. ADRs of Bayer up now by 0.3%. U.S. markets lower across the board. Stocks are declining. Bond yields are climbing on speculation that the Fed's going to be in no rush to cut rates as the economy shows signs of resilience, as exhibited by this morning's retail sales report that came in hotter than expected. S&P right now down 38, drop there of 0.8%. Dow Industrials down 160, a decline of 0.4%. Nasdaq down 150, a decline right now of just about 1%. 10-year yield 4.10% with a 2-year that's yielding 4.35%. Gold down $23 the ounce to 2006, a drop there of 1.1%. And West Texas Intermediate crude 72.66 a barrel, up 26 cents, up by about 0.4%. Operators of Boeing 737 MAX 9 have completed inspections on an initial batch of 40 planes, a key step to eventually end the grounding of the aircraft ordered by government regulators in the wake of an accident earlier this month. Again, recapping stocks lower, S&P down 38, down 0.8%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
You're listening to Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines on Bloomberg Radio.
Our conversation with Spencer Kimball from Emerson Polling last hour would lead you to believe that Nikki Haley's momentum in New Hampshire has peaked. The new numbers today from Suffolk University would certainly suggest that, not the tie we saw in that ARG poll yesterday, Kaylee Lines, where they were tied. And there are a lot of questions about whether this could be another big disappointment for Nikki Haley and what's supposed to be Haley country.
Well, after her third place finish in Iowa, Joe, she has still been trying to characterize this as a two-way race, as basically a state in which she could upset the former president after his victory by a wide margin in Iowa. The issue is, if you look at the Suffolk University poll you're talking about, the margin in New Hampshire also is wide. Trump at 50, Haley at 34. Yeah. That's a 16-point gulf. She has just a few days to close, and she's not going to debate. So how does she do it?
It's going to be a lot of door knocking. It's going to be rallies, town halls, I suspect local media. It's just a question about whether it's going to have any impact, Kaylee, because she couldn't have been feeling too good coming out of Iowa, even though she calls this now what it's a two-man race or whatever she said. Kaylee, she only won 1 out of 99 counties in Iowa, and I believe it was by a vote.
One single vote. Trump got the other 98 counties. Of course, Ron DeSantis is in this mix as well, but in this latest polling, he's down at 5%. So New Hampshire doesn't really seem like his state to win either. Let's bring in Nancy Cook, who covers national politics for us here at Bloomberg. She, like me, was actually miraculously able to make it home from Iowa yesterday when so many others are still struggling. So while we're all trying to leave Iowa in the rearview mirror with different degrees of success, looking forward to New Hampshire, is this as close a contest realistically as Nikki Haley is trying to paint it right now?
Probably not. Trump really has a commanding lead there. We saw a great organization and ground game from his team in Iowa, and we can expect the same in New Hampshire. And what you have to remember is that Trump, has basically turned all of his fire from DeSantis, who they have just sort of written off, to Nikki Haley. And so Trump is, sending out missives about Nikki Haley. They're advertising against her. He's doing rallies. And what he and his team are going to spend the week doing is really calling out Nikki Haley on a bunch of policy positions, past statements she's made on raising the retirement age, what she has said on China. And it's really going to be vicious for the next week. And I will be curious to see how that affects poll numbers.
Vicious is the word, Nancy. We were talking earlier and looking at Truth Social, the composite photograph of Nikki Haley and Hillary Clinton I referred to as nightmare fuel. I don't know if you saw it. It'll freak you out. But also the very racial sort of birthery stuff that he's doing with her first name. On the other side, Nikki Haley, her PAC, the SFA fund, is up with new anti-Trump ads, framing him as a bully and a liar. Are these the closing arguments?
It seems like it. I mean, she has been going after him much more aggressively than she did before. I feel like she has spent much of the contest tiptoeing around him. But if she's going to take him on directly, this is the time to do it, because New Hampshire, much more so than South Carolina, is really a race between her and Trump. And if she wants to overtake him or close the gap between their margins, she has to do it in New Hampshire. New Hampshire is almost like the last stand, I think, for people who really don't want Trump to be president.
Well, Vivek Ramaswamy has already had his last stand, at least in this campaign, dropped out the night of the Iowa caucuses after coming in fourth there, has now endorsed Trump, even appeared with him at a few events. The thinking goes, while Chris Christie dropping out may have helped Haley in New Hampshire, Vivek dropping out helps Trump. All of those votes he would have gotten goes to Trump. How much more difficult does this make New Hampshire for her?
It makes it more difficult. You have to remember, though, that the New Hampshire electorate is probably like geared towards Haley more so than anyone else. Democrats and independents can vote in the New Hampshire primary. That should help her. These are people who just really don't want Trump to win and are expected to turn out for her. The problem is that the unique nature of the New Hampshire electorate will not carry through to South Carolina. That is going to be much more Trump country. And so she needs a strong showing in New Hampshire to really sort of stay in the race and do well.
Haley mentioned the lack of a debate. Nancy, we thought there'd be one. ABC News and WMUR, important local broadcaster, canceled it after Nikki Haley said, "I'm not going if Trump doesn't go," even though Ron DeSantis was looking forward apparently to a two empty chair debate. There are folks wondering if, I don't know, the importance or impact of debates has gone away here after Donald Trump redefined the process. What do you think?
Well, I mean, she has debated. I think that there's some merit to the idea that Trump has broken the primary process, including the need to debate. From Haley's campaign and Super PAC's perspective, you could see why they were like, why do we need to debate DeSantis again? She's done that several times. She did that, a week or so ago. And so I think it makes sense for them to skip it, particularly if, Trump isn't going to participate. That New Hampshire is a head-to-head contest between her and Trump. And so unless sort of you get the two of them on stage, it's hard to really make that comparison.
Although DeSantis is still floating around there, even if he doesn't actually stand a chance or frankly seem that invested in New Hampshire. He left Iowa, went right to South Carolina, Nikki Haley's home state. And you actually have some reporting out today about the DeSantis PAC never back down. Is it a good sign if they're starting to lay people off, Nancy?
Well, no, it's not a good sign. It's a sign that they're running out of money. Never Back Down has been the group there's sort of three super PACs surrounding the DeSantis campaign. Never Back Down is the most prominent one. It was really responsible for a lot of its organization and ground game. I talked with officials there this morning. They're still planning on, doing New Hampshire stuff, but they are running out of money. And, that's why we saw the layoffs. It was interesting because, there was so much chest thumping on the part of the DeSantis people. Oh, we have enough money to take us through Super Tuesday. We're going to plan to be competitive in South Carolina. We don't know through public filings how much money the campaign has on hand, how much money Never Back Down has on hand. But despite this chest thumping, they laid people off across the board, I was told, across teams today. And this is, comes yesterday after the campaign had a call with, all of its donors saying, relax, we have enough money.
Great reporting, Nancy. That's fascinating. I'm looking at the forecast, guys. Because we're never going to forget the weather in Iowa, and it was blamed for a much lower than expected turnout. What are we coming, 110,000 or something instead of compared to the record of well above 180,000? This is encouraging. We've been freezing until now. Tuesday in Manchester, New Hampshire, in January, we're going to have a high of 40 degrees. Nancy, what does that mean for turnout?
Bahamas.
Yeah.
It's probably good. Everybody said, oh, the weather won't affect turnout in Iowa. Iowans are used to it. I mean, I just think that wasn't the case. 100,000 people turned out. That is a tiny sliver of the Republican electorate in that state. We were there. The roads were terrible. There were snowdrifts everywhere. There was no place to park. I mean, that totally affected the turnout. So if it's 40 degrees in Manchester, that is like being in Palm Beach in New Hampshire. And so I feel like people will be more likely to turn out. And I'll be interested to see what that turnout looks like.
Yeah, well, if we could just in our final moment here with you, Nancy, talk about the demographic of those who decided to turn out and support Trump in Iowa. Obviously more rural than urban is where he found support. But when it comes to college-educated versus non-college educated voters, this interests me because I feel like that's part of the Nikki Haley story, her appeal to the college-educated. And yet you didn't actually see her completely victorious over Trump in that group either in Iowa.
No, I think what Iowa showed us is that Trump has a huge beachhead of support across age groups, across demographic groups. He still has the working class base, but he's making a lot of inroads with college-educated Republicans. And Nikki Haley and Trump were kind of tied for that group. And so I think that, the college-educated people are starting to come back to him.
How long can Ron DeSantis afford? Speaking about money here, Nancy, not I guess his own self-image. How long can he afford to keep this going if he's not outperforming? Does South Carolina mark potentially the end of his campaign?
So on the call that they had with donors yesterday, they said that they had enough money to keep going until March. And so that is the South Carolina primary is in late February. And when I talked to campaign officials, in Iowa, they were really stressing, don't worry about New Hampshire. South Carolina is really our place. That is what they're telling donors privately. Again, I haven't seen the campaign filings because there's not a deadline where they have had to make those public. So I have to take their word for it. But they are saying that they are going to compete through South Carolina.
Fascinating. Nancy Cook, find the story on the terminal and Bloomberg.com about what's happening inside the DeSantis campaign. She knows more than anyone about this. Bloomberg senior national political correspondent. Welcome home, Nancy. I'm jealous. Let's get you up to date on the news. Dan Schwartzman has that from the newsroom right here in New York. Hi, Dan.
Hey, Joe, President Biden has made the decision to reclassify the Houthi militants as a specially designated global terrorist organization. In the final days of his administration, Donald Trump had labeled the Houthis as a terrorist organization, only to have Biden revoke the designation early in his term. The Houthis have been firing missiles and harassing commercial ships transiting the Red Sea as a way to protest Israel's invasion of the Gaza Strip. The move to reclassify will take effect in 30 days. House lawmakers want to gauge how much U.S. money is helping to fund China's military. Bloomberg's Amy Morris reports.
The House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing is focused on regulating U.S. investment in China. Peter Harrell, a fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, says U.S. national security is at risk when, quote, Americans invest in Chinese companies that are tied to the Chinese military. Now, Congress should enact a bill from Committee Chair Michael McCaul and Ranking Member Gregory Meeks, which will, quote, help bring career transparency to U.S. investment in China's high-tech sector, which is important for effective policymaking. I'm Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Thanks. Judge Lewis Kaplan has threatened Donald Trump with expulsion from his courtroom. The former president repeatedly ignored Kaplan's warnings to keep quiet as writer E. Jean Carroll testified in the federal court trial to determine damages, if any, Trump would owe her for remarks made in June of 2019. A jury had found that Trump sexually abused Carroll back in 1996, then defamed her in October of 2022 when denying her claims. Carroll also says she has gotten death threats and, well, you can pretty much understand what she may be going through. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Dan Schwartzman and this is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg Radio. The Federal Reserve has issued a fresh assessment of America's economy. And with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
The Fed's region-by-region survey, the Beige Book, is published in the run-up to Fed policy meetings. The next is just under 2 weeks away. Today's Beige Book reports consumer spending helped propel the economy in recent weeks, delivering some seasonal relief and offsetting weakness in manufacturing. The Beige Book also says businesses are increasingly optimistic about the U.S. economic outlook, though the labor market seems to be cooling a bit. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
And one other economic note today, homebuilder confidence is up, rising the most in almost a year. Lower loan rates boosted customer traffic and sales among home builders. Toll down now by 3.9%. Among some of the other home building companies, KB Home down today by just about 0.7%. Correction on Toll, down by 1.2%. And Pulte Home, PHM on the ticker there, it is down by 0.7%. We are looking at a down day for U.S. stocks. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the red. S&P down by 0.8%. Right now we have got the NASDAQ Composite Index down 0.9. The Dow down 157. That is a drop of 0.5%. 10-year yield 4.10% with a 2-year that's now yielding 4.35%. Gold down $25 the ounce at $2,005, a drop of 1.1%. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.2%, $72.56 a barrel. Again, recapping, stocks are lower. S&P down 35, down 0.7%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
You're listening to Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines on Bloomberg Radio.
The White House has more to worry about today than just the meeting that's about to transpire with the Speaker of the House, Chuck Schumer, and the chairs of the national security-related committees. They're talking about border in Ukraine, but if you read the terminal about what's happening in Iran, you know that there are a lot of different things. They're spinning a lot of plates at once, and that's the way things frequently are inside the West Wing. Enter the Khyber breaker. Kaylee, have you seen this?
I have. It's a precision-guided missile, basically, and it can go a really long distance, Joe. That is the crux of the matter here. It was sent from Iran into Syria in a strike on ISIS. That's about 1,300 kilometers, 800 miles, and Iran says it can go even further than that. 1,450-kilometer maximum range, and that maybe gives Israel a pretty big reason to be nervous.
Incredible to learn that Iran could, in fact, hit Israel directly, and after we saw what they did in Syria and Iraq, for that matter, Kaylee, this is pretty scary stuff. It's an incredible piece of reporting, and it sounds scary. I don't know what the Khyber breaker means exactly, but this would make it the farthest such attack in the IRGC's history, what we saw in Syria. Peter Martin's with you in Washington. You know, when we bring in Peter, it's serious.
Yeah, absolutely right. He's here. I'm here. Joe still isn't here, Peter. But wherever you are, you probably pay attention to a story like this, as there are these heightened concerns around escalating tensions in the Middle East and the potential for this to turn into a substantial regional conflict. How nervous is the U.S. about not the Iranian proxies, but about Iran specifically directly involving itself in some of this activity?
Well, I think that's a concern for U.S. officials that's kind of been running throughout this whole process. It's one thing to deter proxies, whether it's Hezbollah in northern Israel or proxies in Iraq and Syria. It's another thing to think about direct war between Israel and Iran, or maybe even the U.S. and Iran. I think for the moment, U.S. officials feel like they have kind of deterred that from happening, but certainly this latest show of Iranian military force demonstrates why officials in Israel and indeed Washington are worried.
Peter, as you cover the Pentagon, are we just learning about this, or is everyone just learning about it? Did Israel know about this? Did the U.S. know this existed?
I'm not entirely clear on this. I think there has been a widespread assumption that Israel is capable of hitting, that Iran is capable of hitting Israel if it needs to, and certainly that's been a concern running through. Iran has been able to set up a network of proxy actors throughout the Middle East, stretching all the way to Israel's borders. Of course, Hamas is backed by Iran, and so is Hezbollah. And so that kind of near and present threat has been something that's been there for a little while. But of course, these new missiles will just add to that.
Would it change anything about the composition of the aid, of the weaponry the U.S. would provide to Israel, or is it still just continue supplying the Iron Dome? Some of these similar questions, and I just asked this knowing that at that White House meeting Joe was alluding to, that's going to take place between congressional leaders and the president. The supplemental we're talking about isn't just aid for Ukraine; it is also aid for Israel. And I wonder how the U.S. is thinking about what Israel needs when there's threats like this out there.
I mean, I think my impression is that Israel has a pretty strong shelf of capabilities when it comes to hitting back against Iranian conventional threats. The question here would be, can the U.S. help to dampen tensions in a way that would make war less likely overall? Getting to a point where Israel doesn't need to use those capabilities.
Pretty incredible to read as well. Iran also hit Pakistan with missiles on Tuesday. Peter, where's the Pentagon on concerns over a wider conflict?
I mean, I would say from the White House through the Pentagon to the State Department, U.S. officials have been very concerned about the risks of a widening conflict for the whole time here. The latest strikes inside Pakistan and indeed some additional strikes inside Iraq just kind of hit that home. It's something that the Iraqi government has responded to in a kind of rare public rebuke of Iran, and it's something where Pakistan has responded to strongly as well, even recalling its ambassador from Tehran.
Of course, as we talk about Iran and the Iranian proxies, the U.S. has taken direct action against one of the proxy groups, the Houthis, with multiple strikes trying to take out their capability as they continue to threaten and attack vessels in the Red Sea. Do we have a sense of to what degree those direct strikes are going to continue? How many more offensive maneuvers we could see coming from the U.S. military?
Yeah, I mean, the Pentagon's quite cagey about putting numbers on that kind of thing. They like to use this sort of generic language about we will strike at a time of our own choosing. But I think the expectation is that there is more military action to come simply because there are very few signs that the Houthis have yet been deterred. And of course, the reason for that, I think, U.S. officials and everyone else would recognize is that the Houthis are not acting on their own; they're acting in accordance with the wishes of Tehran.
Peter Martin, we understand the Secretary of Defense is back home, or at least he's out of the hospital, and he's quote unquote working from home. To what extent do we know anything about his condition at this point, or is this still shrouded in mystery?
I mean, beyond the disclosures we saw last week about his diagnosis of prostate cancer as the initial cause of this, we don't have much more information. Pentagon officials were very keen to stress that Secretary Austin was conducting his full duties from his hospital room, including the use of secure communications, which they said they had set up there for him. And I'm sure that would always have been the case at his home.
All right, Peter Martin, who covers the Pentagon for us here at Bloomberg, from drama around personnel to what's happening in the Middle East. Thank you so much for joining us. And Joe, that Lloyd Austin story, I think, is one that isn't going to go away anytime soon. Even if his hospital stay has come to an end, the questions around it, the communication failures that we saw happen, the inquiries into that, I think, are really just getting started.
Did you see, Kaylee, audio from the phone call that his security detail made to Fairfax County Dispatch? This is remarkable. They deserve credit. The Daily Beast got this through a FOIA request, and you could hear the staffer asking them to remain subtle, no sirens or lights, as they came to get the secretary at home.
They're trying to do this in an subtle way, I think was the quote on the phone call, which just speaks again to the perhaps privacy concerns that the secretary had surrounding his own medical issues. But again, when you're the Secretary of Defense, that privacy may not be as robust as you would like.
To think we're still talking about this, though, the things we don't know, to your point. And how's this going with him at home? Is he on Zoom like wearing a bathrobe? I don't quite understand We'll have more on Lloyd Austin as we learn it. With Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.
Your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. JP Morgan Chase says it plans to add to its headcount this year as the firm sees opportunities in everything from deal making to U.S. wealth management to international retail banking, bucking a trend by Wall Street rivals who have been shedding thousands of jobs in recent months. Now, that word from President Daniel Pinto, who spoke with Bloomberg Radio this morning at the World Economic Forum in Davos.
I think that all the components are for an strong year. So I think that the opportunities in retail, in investment banking, that has been very subdued for the last couple of years. So depending on volatility, markets will do well. We see more growth in payments. So and we did, yeah. When I look at our plans, we will increase our staff this year for sure.
And you can hear more of that conversation on the Surveillance podcast. JP Morgan Chase shares, they are trading lower right now by about 0.5%. Earnings news. U.S. Bancorp reported earnings that beat analyst estimates as the bank benefits from elevated interest rates. Shares of U.S. Bancorp, they are trading lower today, down now by 2.1%. And also reporting earnings this morning, Citizens Financial. They're based in Providence, Rhode Island. That's stock higher after reporting earnings that beat estimates. Citizens up now by 1.6%. And those are our top company stories at this hour. And this is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines on Bloomberg Radio.
We'll have some final thoughts with Kaylee in just a moment after we check world and national news. For that, we turn to Dan Schwartzman in the Bloomberg newsroom right here in New York. Hi, Dan.
Thanks, Kaylee and Joe. The AP reporting that a judge in Maine has paused the decision of an election official to remove Donald Trump from the presidential primary ballot. The judge wants to allow the U.S. Supreme Court time to rule on a similar case ongoing in Colorado. Superior Court Judge Michaela Murphy denied Trump's request for a stay in the proceedings, instead sending the case back to Maine's Secretary of State with the instructions to wait till a decision has been rendered in the Colorado case before modifying or upholding the decision to bar Trump. Speaking of Trump, Judge Lewis Kaplan threatening the former president with expulsion from his courtroom. Trump repeatedly ignoring Kaplan's warnings to keep quiet as writer E. Jean Carroll testified in the federal court trial to determine damages, if any, Trump would owe her for remarks made back in June of 2019. A jury had found that the former president sexually abused Carroll back in 1996, then defamed her in October of 2022 when denying her claims. Operators of Boeing's 737 MAX 9 jets have completed inspections on an initial batch of 40 planes. It's a key step to eventually ending the grounding of the aircraft. Bloomberg's Karen Moscow with details.
The FAA will now review the findings from those 40 checks to determine whether the Boeing drafted procedures are appropriate to return the fleet of 171 parked MAX 9s to service. The agency ordered the grounding after a MAX 9 operated by Alaska Airlines suddenly lost a fuselage section shortly after takeoff earlier this month. That sparked a crisis in confidence in Boeing's manufacturing processes and a flurry of investigations. Once the FAA approves an inspection and maintenance process, it'll be required on every one of the grounded jets prior to future operation. Karen Moscow, Bloomberg Radio.
Thanks, Karen. The super PAC supporting Ron DeSantis, Never Back Down, has begun a round of layoffs, although the number of those losing their jobs was unclear. The layoffs come despite DeSantis' campaign claiming they do have a path forward. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Dan Schwartzman, and this is Bloomberg. Kaylee and Joe, back to you.
Dan, we thank you. It's going to be Escape from New York for me, hopefully the game I'm playing here, Kaylee. I tried already to do The Amazing Race, and it got me nowhere as I'm still in Manhattan. You're in D.C., though, and you've got a very important conversation coming up on balance of power with one of the players here in this tax deal that we're talking about, the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, making his debut on Bloomberg a bit later on today.
Yeah, Congressman Jason Smith of Missouri, who, as you said, chairs that committee that has made this deal with Senator Ron Wyden of the Senate Finance Committee. $78 billion. You have child tax credit expansion on the one hand for a series of tax breaks for businesses on the other. But we have a lot of lingering questions about this, Joe, like the SALT cap, something people up in New York, where you are still stuck,
yes,
care a lot about, and also whether or not we could see other changes beyond SALT, what Mike Johnson, the Speaker, thinks of all of this as well.
The SALT story will never go away for the rest of our lives.
No.
I guess this watch story won't either. I suspect this is going to come up on Bloomberg Business Week coming up. Kaylee, you're wearing one of them. This whole thing with the blood monitor. Do you have the new one? Did you actually get it before it?
No.
No.
I have an old watch.
I assume
so
always
I don't
you have the
this
latest
feature.
Apple technology.
That would be my husband. He has a bit of a problem with the Apple products, Joe. But this is the Series 9 and Ultra 2 models of the watch. The blood oxygen monitor obviously is a bit of a patent dispute with this other U.S. company, Massimo. And Christmas, during the week of Christmas, if you remember, Apple had to stop selling these watches because they were found by the International Trade Commission to have violated the patent. Therefore, an import ban went into place. Then a court stepped in and said, hold on, we're going to stay this for now. Consider the path forward here. But that now the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit has said, nope, they have to stop selling these watches with this feature. And so that ban expires Thursday. That's tomorrow, Joe, at 5 p.m. So if you want one of these, you got to go buy it like today.
Ka-ching, ka-ching. That's the lawyer.
Is there a story that Kaylee cannot riff on? But so, hey, I'm in the same room as Carol and Tim,
Hi.
Kaylee.
Hey,
Starting
Kaylee.
Monday, we're going to meet every day around this time. Is that all right with everybody?
We would love
that.
we've got a new schedule
We have
coming.
big stuff coming.
It's in my calendar.
Is that true?
Yeah, it's in my calendar.
All right.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
We'll be staring
Starting
down
Monday.
the line at you guys. The lovely Carol and Tim are up next, of course. Kaylee, I hope I find you tomorrow in Washington. I'll miss you on BOP later.
Godspeed, Joe.
Business Week starts now.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
Very good afternoon, everybody. Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio here in New York City, streaming on YouTube. We are on Bloomberg Originals as well. It is Wednesday. It's kind of a Fed day. We'll tell you why in just a moment. October. No, it's not October.
I don't know why you went there, Carol. I got nothing to help you out. It's January. Yeah, Wednesday, January 17th.
I'm not ready to get to October. We got a lot to get to.
I did write 2023 earlier
Maybe
today.
that's it. I'm in a hurry.
Yeah, stocks down, bond yields climbing. What is the hurry?
Traders are not in a hurry.
That's right. Traders are up in their bets that the Fed will be in no rush to cut U.S. rates. Who's to blame? Is it you? Is it me? Is it every U.S. consumer out there that just spent some significant cash back in December?
John,
Although maybe it wasn't
I
cash.
so hope my husband's not listening.
Was this you?
No.
Well, it was us.
But it was all of us, right? And
Yeah.
on that, we are going to get into how we were all shopping as we wrapped up 2023. U.S. retail sales rising at the strongest pace in 3 months in December. So, yay, consumers still strong. That's important to our economy. But nay, when it comes to a Fed cutting rates anytime soon. See what we did there?
Yeah, I see what you did. Okay, so that's consumer spending.
Yes.
What about when it comes to what we workers are doing when it comes to business travel and using our corporate cards?
An important metric.
I do like swiping my corporate card more than I like swiping my personal card. I will say that.
A second glass of wine?
We're going to get to that with Jennifer Petty.
One glass.
No, you got to follow all the rules. Jennifer Petty's head of global card and comprehensive payables at Bank of America. She's going to be joining us a little later in the program. Get an idea on what businesses are spending.
Right, we always talk about IT spending, important metric, but this is, I think, also important. Also, we're going to get into geopolitics, a couple different ways we're going to look at it. Mick Mulroy, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, he's going to stop by on the latest tensions, or dare we say escalations. I'm not the expert, but it feels like escalating. Critics might say we're escalating.
They certainly would. Speaking of that, we're going to dig into geopolitics and the geometry of global trade with Olivia White, McKinsey senior partner, who's in Davos.
This is kind of interesting. I love this kind of take on it. We've got to the story on what America's relocation boom means for the for this year's U.S. election. People have finally, after many years, decades of not moving around in this country, they did because of the pandemic. So what does that mean for the outcome?
Also, Julie Hansen is back with us, the U.S. CEO of the language learning platform Babbel, on what's driving 50% of sales.
Here's a hint. We be in. I'm just going to say.
Maybe you need Babbel.
Maybe I do. All of that to come. To the markets we go. Countdown to the close. It starts right now.
Countdown to the close. Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage ahead of the U.S. market close starts right now.
This is the countdown to the close. Romaine Bostic alongside Scarlett Fu. We're joined right now by our colleagues Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec. A hearty welcome to all of our audiences across all of our platforms. Bloomberg Television, Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Originals, Carol Masser.
Yes.
And yes, those folks who are still streaming us on YouTube. Happy Purple Day, by the way.
Thank you very much. Yeah. And we love those people on YouTube. We love them everywhere.
I do.
Having said that,
not on X, but YouTube.
All right, we're going to table that for a moment. Having said that, listen, we've all been
talking...
talking...
Would you like to comment, Tim, on that?
Yeah, no. I'm going to let you two work
We
on
love
this.
every platform that loves us. Let's put it that way. Okay? Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair.
All right. Also fair is, I don't know about you guys, but it seems like we were all shopping in December, right? We talked about the retail sales number. I think you guys probably did too. Having said that, so consumers seem to be okay out there shopping. Whether they're doing that on credit, we can debate that later on. But having said that, U.S. home builder sentiment also seeming pretty positive. We're seeing it increasing by the most in nearly a year. And I've got to say, Tim, as we see any kind of pullback in mortgage rates, that's got to be part of the reason why.
Yeah, in fact, because rates are falling below 7%, although today I just checked, they're exactly at 7%. Some builders are stepping back from cutting prices. Romaine, 31% of builders this month reported lowering prices. It's the smallest share since August. The average reduction held at around 6%. That's according to this report. I will say, even though we're talking about mortgage rates at 7%, that is still historically high, at least if you look over the last 2 decades.
But
Before
still,
the pandemic, it was at about 4%.
But if we're talking about actual home builders, so new homes, I mean, and you overlay sort of the stock performance, as well as, I mean, the fundamental performance, I mean, it really defied a lot of expectations last year, primarily because the existing home sales market is just such a mess in terms of affordability, that they kind of benefited from that. So I think even when you look at some of these, the higher mortgage rate numbers here, it begs the question here as to whether these home builders still have enough in the pipeline that it's not going to really matter.
Beyond that, of course, the builders also offer mortgage buy downs too.
Do you guys see the sun?
Yeah, it's shining very
Is it going to melt
It's the halo around your head.
Well,
he is
it going to
kind of
melt
an
the
angel.
ice?
He is an angel.
I just want it to melt the ice. That's all I want. Warm up.
Yeah, watch
warm
out
up
for the
streets,
falling ice.
please.
Or is it a UFO?
No, let's not go there.
All right.
Let's talk about another story that crossed the Bloomberg about how average cash bonuses are down, and it's a sign of how employers are regaining leverage in the relationship between employers and employees. The average cash bonus last month down 21% year over year. This is according to Gusto, the payroll software company. And what's interesting is that every industry posted a decline, whether you're talking about tech or tourism or transportation. Remember, the hospitality industry has been having a hard time finding workers too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was the lead one, tourism, too. But I mean, I'm curious as to like how they sort of aggregate this, right? I mean, I guess they're just taking everybody in the pool here because we've kind of heard mixed anecdotes here about how there's still sort of certain tier of people that are still getting their bonuses at a level that I guess they would be happy with, while other folks are either getting nothing or a lot lower.
I think it's just interesting when we try to figure out kind of the way forward and what's going on. And the labor market, right, has been something that everybody keeps scratching their head. It stayed strong through all of this. If we're starting to see weaker points and that companies don't have to pay bonuses. Remember when they were doing it for, was it fast food workers? Like everybody.
Signing bonuses and everything, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So if that is starting to weaken and go away, then maybe, there is some weakness in the labor market that we don't necessarily see in those monthly stats.
Yeah, those are really tantalizing. I almost quit. I was going to work at Popeyes.
There's also non-monetary perks too, right? Work
Yes.
from home, hybrid work, free lunch at the office, that kind of thing.
Which place would you go to work, Romaine?
Choose carefully.
Are you coming with
This
me?
is a trick question.
Are you coming with me, Carol Master?
Yes. I'll flip the burgers and you can
And I
do
do
the fries.
the fries. Wonderful.
All right, we're going to continue this
Match made.
conversation.
I'd watch that show.
Meanwhile, Tim Senovic blinding me here.
Yeah, this is
Can
probably the
somebody
last
fix
day
that?
they're gonna let me.
Is there a
sit
reason
here.
why they have you on a glass booth?
Is my neck gonna get sunburned?
I think so.
For the next 3 hours. That's what I want to know.
I'm going to go back to what Scarlett was it you said? He's angel-like?
He's
or
an
is that
angel,
Romaine? Yeah. He's angel-like.
Oh, very kind.
Romaine, you
Beware
can
false
learn from
prophets.
Tim.
Yeah.
I'm just saying. All right, we're going to be back in less than an hour's time. We're going to wrap up this trading day on this Wednesday. Our cross-platform radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. Folks, we will see you at 4 p.m. Wall Street time.
So I do want to just explain a little bit for our listeners what's going on here. We broadcast on YouTube. If you're watching us on YouTube or Bloomberg Originals, you can see my shot, and there's like the sun is shining in on this winter day, Carol, where it's like 19 degrees outside here in New York.
And I don't want to kind of tick it off because I'm so happy to have any sunlight right now.
But I did move. I moved my seat next to you.
You did.
After years of being a full computer away from you.
Yeah.
And day 3, it's going okay.
You realized I'm not going to bite, so you're like, okay, I'll sit
Yeah,
next to her.
it took 3 years, and I was like, okay, it's safe to go over there.
All right, we actually, yeah, exactly.
That's a little behind the scenes for everyone, okay?
That's good. Filling in the details, which
Yeah.
is very fair to all of our audience, which we like to make sure you all feel welcome. Having said that, a lot of retailers felt welcome in December. Man, we were all out shopping big time last month. We just talked about it with our TV colleagues. U.S. retail sales rising at the strongest pace in 3 months in December, capping a solid holiday season that suggests consumer resilience heading into the new year. Tim, 9 of 13 categories posted increase. Biggest gains in clothing, general merchandising stores, which include the department stores, and then e-commerce.
Okay, motor vehicle sales were up 1.1%. It matched the biggest increase since May. Those at gas stations fell for a third month as pump prices declined. Meantime, also today, some economists worry U.S. inflation fight may become more difficult as the Fed gets closer to its 2% target. A new central bank research paper argues that that's actually not the case and that there's no compelling support for a more difficult last mile.
I love this story. All right, so let's get into it. Our Steve Matthews actually wrote about that. So why, oh, why is it all so difficult? Tasked with figuring it out, reading in between the lines on every eco data point, Fed word, and market move, including those beige book notes that we got today. Bloomberg News economic reporter Steve Matthews out there in our Atlanta bureau. Also with us is Bloomberg News rates reporter Michael McKenzie. He is on Zoom from New York. All right, Steve, kick it off. Retail sales. I think it's good news that consumers still felt confident, But is it bad news that maybe all the spending will have to end sometime soon, and also means maybe the Fed can kind of hold off? Although it feels to me like Goldilocks, but you take it away. You're the expert.
Yeah, I agree with you, Carol. It does feel like Goldilocks. There's very strong consumer spending. And, just a few minutes ago, the Beige Book came out, which was kind of a report of anecdotes from around the country, from Fed contacts. And they were citing that businesses continue to be maybe a little bit more optimistic about next year. So yes, there are some signs that the consumers could be running out of steam. I mean, there was, like, for example, more use of credit cards, more use of buy now, pay later kinds of techniques. But by and large, it seems like consumers are pretty resilient, and there are reasons to believe that would continue, particularly with gas prices coming down, with inflation coming down. People are getting real pay increases, real higher wages, and that should continue to allow people to have some ability to spend.
And yet, we are seeing a market reaction in the equity market and in the bond market specifically, and that's what I want to talk about with Michael McKenzie, who covers rates here at Bloomberg News. Michael, come on in here, because we're seeing quite the reaction in terms of yields on the front end moving higher than the 10-year now at 4.1%. The message here, at least, that the bond traders are sending is we're not going to see a rate cut. We don't have the confidence that we're going to see a rate cut in March that we had just a few days ago.
Yes, Tim, I guess you can argue that. I mean, rate cut expectations, if you look at swaps for March, show we're now back to coin toss territory, 50-50. We were recently at the beginning of this week around 80% odds. So there's still a fair bit of data to come between now and the March meeting for the Fed. So I think the market's pricing in, 50-50 odds. That makes sense. I think the real story here is that the market had just got too carried away, and that actually when Christopher Waller spoke this week, he kind of gently reminded the market that, look, 75 basis points is kind of the maintenance rate cuts that you should expect. And if the market's pricing in, it's still pricing in, about 140 basis points of cuts for this year. That just looks too much. If indeed the growth picture remains resilient, inflation keeps coming down, you're going to get that sort of soft landing. And a soft landing is really, from having spoken to a couple of investors this morning, they think it's like 50 to 100 basis points of cuts this year, nothing more than that.
I'm wondering too, and Steve, I'm going to get back to you in just a moment, but Michael, is there anything in the market trade that gives you an idea? We've talked with you about ranges, right? And as we were kind of pushing through and bumping above that 4% level, but is there anything in the trade that tells you kind of where we're settling in, or is it that the bond market kind of catching up to where the Fed is right now? Like, what are you seeing in there?
Well, I think what's interesting is 10s are holding in around 410, which was kind of the peak we saw after the jobs report earlier this month. So that's a key level to watch. And then beyond 410, you're really looking around the 420 area, which is where we were roughly when Powell did the pivot back after the December FOMC statement came out. For the front end, I think is a little bit risky here. And I think you could probably see a pretty good run above 440, maybe to 450 in the 2-year, as some of those rate cut expectations come out of the market here. It's going to really depend on the data that we're going to get. And probably we've only really got PCE next Friday, and after that it's the Fed meeting at the end of the month.
Yeah, there's a lot to look forward to. I ran into Matt Boesler a little earlier, and he mentioned next week is blackout week, so it's like kind of take a breather ahead of the Fed meeting.
Yeah.
And I know that certainly a few people are excited about that, because we've been hearing from a lot of members of the Federal Reserve. Hey, speaking of that, Steve, let's talk a little bit about the Beige Book and the data that we got just in the last hour. You mentioned this at the top of our interview, but give us some details about what that showed.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. It's also very interesting in that the Fed is basically taking stock of anecdotal data a lot more now than they have in the past. But basically, it showed that the economy is resilient. If you do a word search for the word recession in the Beige Book, which goes to 60 or so pages, the word recession does not appear in the Beige Book.
Wow.
Economic growth is solid, and consumer spending was regarded as being very solid. Lots of interesting anecdotes. New York was cited as an area where Tourism was really booming. Tourism is back to where it was in before COVID. Hotels are doing really well. And, you know, you can go from industry to industry and from district to district, and there's a mixture of pictures. You know, there's AI enthusiasm in Atlanta. I hadn't seen the AI mentioned much in the beige book, but the general picture is the outlook looks pretty strong right now.
Yeah, the Atlanta Fed GDP Now index rising to 2.41% from 2.21%, right? That was out there. I want to go back to what you wrote about, Steve, and this is the Fed economist who says inflation last mile to be easier than thought. We talk so much, and Michael, let me bring you back, so much about this last mile and how as we get towards the end, for the Fed, it's tricky in kind of calling it right. But this point by this Atlanta Fed economist concluded that too much concern over the last mile of the fight could result in a policy error. So, Michael, first let me get you on this. I mean, how do you think about the Fed? Like when you get down to the end, we've said it's so crucial, maybe it's not, but by paying so much attention to it, the Fed could, you know, maybe tighten policy more than is necessary and kind of get it wrong.
Well, that was clearly what Waller was talking about this week. You know, they don't want to make a policy mistake. At the same time, they don't want to cut too early. It's a really difficult balancing act for the Fed, and it's going to be really fascinating to see how they communicate this to the market at the next few meetings. And it means this is why the bond market remains volatile. It is swinging around, particularly in that 2-year, 3-year, 5-year area, because that's where all the rate cut pricing comes in, it comes out, and it's a market that, you know, at the moment, I think the market tells you that they think the Fed will get down to 2% in a fairly orderly way. And what's giving the market confidence is that last month's PCE came in, if you looked at the 6-month annualized rate, that was running at 1.9%. Now, based on last week's CPI data, we're expecting next week's updated release on the PCE to show that 6-month rate moderates to about 1.8%. So from that basis, the bond market is saying to the Fed, you're at 2%. And if that continues,
right,
they're going to still price in the possibility of a rate cut in March.
That's why we go from data point to data point. Steve, saving you the last 30 seconds. Love what you wrote and put out there about the Fed economist. Final thoughts.
Yeah, I think, you know, pay attention to what Chris Waller said. What he said yesterday was that the Fed's in no rush to cut. And while, you know, they say that they are balanced in terms of their approach, being worried about both their employment mandate and inflation, they do not want to be in a situation where they cut and then have to reverse that. And Jay Powell does not want to be seen as, you know, similar to Arthur Burns. So they're going to perhaps wait a little bit longer than necessary.
All right, guys, so appreciate it. Steve Matthews and our Michael McKenzie, you guys are incredible. This is Bloomberg.
events, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 3:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Apple shares are trading lower. Apple will have to stop selling its Series 9 and Ultra 2 smartwatches with a blood oxygen feature in the U.S., suffering another legal setback in its patent dispute with Masimo Corp. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the federal court declined to grant Apple a longer pause on an import ban of the devices imposed by the U.S. International Trade Commission. Apple shares down now by about 0.8%. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the red. Stocks join losses in risk assets as bond yields climbed on speculation. The Fed will be in no rush to cut rates as the economy shows signs of resilience. S&P right now down 41, drop there of 0.9%. The Dow down 190, down 0.5. NASDAQ down 146, lower by 1%. 10-year yield 4.09% with a 2-year that's yielding 4.33%. Spot gold down $22 the ounce at $2,005, a drop of 1.1%. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.4%, $72.67 a barrel. The World Economic Forum is underway in Davos, and Bloomberg Radio is there. And this morning we caught up with Ann Walsh, Chief Investment Officer of Guggenheim Partners, who talked about the outlook for Federal Reserve rate cuts.
Our camp is that we still see a recession coming, and although our base case is a mild recession, and as a result, we still see rate cuts. And we are actually predicting that they start sooner rather than later. And I know now that's not exactly the mainstream opinion, but we see a lot of softness in the economy coming ahead, and that leads us to our outcome.
And you can hear more of that conversation on the Surveillance podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. And, of course, Bloomberg Terminal users can find plenty of Davos coverage under NI Davos. Charles Schwab shares are tumbling after the brokerage reported declines in profit, new assets, and deposits. Right now, we have got Schwab lower by 1.5%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, war between Gaza now raging for more than 100 days. The war between Israel and the Palestinian Islamist group Hamas has drawn in Yemen's Houthi rebels who have controlled northwestern Yemen for nearly a decade. Now, like Hamas, the Houthis are hostile to Israel, backed by Iran. The rebels have disrupted traffic in the Red Sea by repeatedly attacking ships there, and they've attempted to strike Israel with missiles and also with drones.
Well, the U.S. and U.K. have launched airstrikes on Houthi targets in Yemen in response to these ship attacks. One more thing we should note, Iran conducted a missile strike on a militant group in Pakistan, sparking a diplomatic crisis between the neighboring countries at a time of rising regional tensions. The bottom line here, Carol, a lot of moving and volatile parts to this very complicated conflict.
Absolutely. So with what you need to know, Mick Mulroy is with us, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, retired CIA officer, U.S. Marine as well. He's co-founder of Lobo Institute. They advise, they consult, they also teach on current and future conflicts and how to put an end to them and also prevent their recurrence, and how to help those that are affected as a result of it all. He joins us on Zoom from Montana. Also with us, Bloomberg News International Economics and Security Team Editor Larry Liebert. He's on Zoom from Washington, D.C. Mick Mulroy, escalation, can we use that word to describe what's going on right now?
So great to be with you all again. Yes, I think that's fair. I think we are actually everybody's talking about a regional conflict, but I think we are seeing a regional conflict right now. The Houthis are intent, as they usually are, at doing anything they can to disrupt the United States, objectives overseas, and they are not going to stop. Although I do think it was the right thing to do to redesignate them, at least under this new designation, as a specifically designated global terrorist organization.
Explain what that does, now that they're designated as a specifically designated terrorist organization.
Yeah, so before they were under a different category, a foreign terrorist organization, that did more. It restricted their movements in addition to the financial penalties that come with that. But it was problematic when it came to delivering humanitarian aid into Yemen. And that's why they were delisted. This new designation, the specially designated global terrorist, does give these financial restrictions, but it does allow a carve out so to make sure that all these very needy people in Yemen, about 21 million rely on food aid, can still get that without any interruption.
All right, Larry, let's bring you in. You follow international economics and security here for us at Bloomberg, talking with the administration. What's your intel? As we just heard from Mick, saying we are seeing a regional conflict. Is this a regional conflict, though, that increasingly is pulling in the United States, Europe, and other places in the world that they kind of can't go back on?
Yeah, I think it definitely is a regional conflict. The question is how you define that. It's not an all-out regional war. The lid is on, if just barely, on all sorts of regional tensions. And you see, for instance, in this attack, Iran attacking this group in Pakistan, you see an example of the never-ending conflict between Shiites and Sunnis in the Muslim world, and that includes, in this case, Shiite Iran striking a Sunni group that it considered terrorists and provoking a conflict with Pakistan. And that's just one of the side effects, because all of the groups, all of the interests in the region are seeing this as an opportunity, if nothing else, to become more visible in their roles.
Mick, do you think this Iran attack on this militant group in Pakistan, is this an isolated dispute, or is this something bigger?
So I think Larry is right. There's been an ongoing Shia-Sunni issue for a long time. This is seeing it come to head. We saw the ISIS attack in Iran that killed so many people. And I think a lot of these strikes from Iran are indicative of that. And although this is a regional conflict, as I've already said, it could get worse. The big issue right now is whether there becomes a second front in Israel with Lebanese Hezbollah. They are much more capable than Hamas ever was. That would be a significant increase, escalation, if you will, in this conflict. They could have significant reverberations in the region.
Is that, Nick, what's holding it back from becoming, we talked escalation already, but even something much more on a kind of a World War III kind of level?
Well, it would certainly take this into a hot war that's direct and substantial. The Hezbollah, I don't think, actually wants this conflict, but they also wouldn't pull back from the border with Israel, which is required, I would say, under UN resolutions. And Israel cannot put their 70,000 citizens who they had to pull off that border and put in hotels until they do pull out. So I think, talking to the Israelis recently, I think they view this as inevitable. And that's something the United States does not want to see happen. That's why we put those two aircraft, now one aircraft carrier strike groups in the Eastern Mediterranean. But at the end of the day, it's not up to entirely to the United States. If that war kicks off, it could significantly affect the region and really blow this into a large regional conflict.
Larry, come on in. I see you nodding here. Go ahead.
I'm going to say that. That's absolutely true. Also, the question is, what does Iran decide, and what does Iran really want? They clearly are eager to encourage and arm these various groups, all of which we describe correctly in stories as Iran-backed. But it's not clear that Iran directly wants to get involved or that they want the lid off all of these tensions as opposed to just keeping it bubbling. So that's going to be the big question, isn't it?
Well, Mick, what do you think Iran wants here?
So I think they like the fact that they have caused this turmoil. They support the Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, all the militias that are attacking our positions in Syria and Iraq. But Hezbollah, they actually started. So the IRGC, which is kind of like their special operations intel mixed group, the IRG Quds Force specifically, started Hezbollah, and they are substantial. They have a lot of fighters and an incredible amount of weapons, and not just weapons, but precision weapons. So they could target the airport, Ben Gurion, they could target the infrastructure, the cell network, the electrical network, and they can, even though the Iron Dome is a very capable system, they can overwhelm it. They have like 60,000 of these that they can launch almost simultaneously, and there's no system in the world that can handle that.
Mick,
so that is what I think is the biggest concern. Iran is really a key factor in that. I don't think they want a regional war directly, but that is something we'll have to see.
Well, that's what I was going to say. You know, Mick, what holds Iran back from taking this step? Once you cross that threshold, kind of there's no going back.
Right. And I think, there's a saying that Iran has no problem fighting to the last militant in their proxy groups because it's not really consequential to them. They don't have a problem if these militants are dying. Now, these IRGC Quds Force are getting caught. because they are out there helping them and we're targeting them. But they don't have a direct attack against them. That could happen. And if that happens, it's not going to be good for Iran. They already have a lot of things going against them. This would be another one. The United States, I don't think, wants to do it, but it would also give potentially Israel a chance to mitigate what we haven't talked about yet was the potential for Iran to get a nuclear weapon.
Larry, I want to end with you, just give you the last word. We have a minute left. Just weigh in on everything that Mick just talked about and also about, my question, which is what's the U.S.'s appetite for actually getting involved in a real war with Iran?
Well, the appetite for the U.S. is very limited. The question is whether they would have no choice if there's direct Iranian involvement. And so it's all on a nice edge and remains that way.
Like I said, I feel like the global economy and then geopolitics, and not necessarily in that order, is our top stories. It feels like every day.
The two are inextricably bound.
Yeah, exactly. Hey guys, thank you so much. So appreciate it. Mick Mulroy, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, as we mentioned earlier, also a retired CIA officer and U.S. Marine, co-founder of Lobo Institute. Kind of like what their mission is in terms of, teaching us all about conflicts, current and future, how it affects everybody, and how we prevent them going forward. Bloomberg News International Economics and Security Team Editor too, Larry Liebert, with us, getting us up to date on that situation on Zoom from Washington, D.C. So appreciate it.
Hey, let's stay in Washington, D.C. And get our check. Actually, we're going to go here. Let's stay in New York and get a check on the latest world and national news. We've got Dan Schwartzman from the Bloomberg 1130 newsroom. Hey, Dan.
Hey, Carol and Tim. The AP reporting that a Maine judge has paused the decision of an election official to remove Donald Trump from the presidential primary ballot. The judge wants to allow the U.S. Supreme Court time to rule on a similar case ongoing in Colorado. Supreme Court Judge Michaela Murphy denied Trump's request for a stay in the proceedings, instead sending the case back to Maine's Secretary of State with the instructions to wait till a decision has been rendered in that Colorado case before modifying or upholding the decision to bar Trump. As you've been hearing on Bloomberg Radio, the U.S. is putting the Houthi militant group back on its list of global terrorists. Bloomberg's Nathan Hager reporting from Washington.
This move is a reversal for President Biden. He took the Houthis off the list of specially designated global terrorists early in his presidency to try to ease the humanitarian crisis in Yemen after years of civil war. But this recent string of Red Sea attacks tied to the war in Gaza has changed the game for the White House. A senior administration official says the designation will take effect in 30 days. That's to give the U.S. time to shape sanctions on the Houthis that won't harm ordinary Yemenis. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
Thanks, Nathan. Boeing has moved one step closer to ungrounding its 737 MAX 9 jets as operators of the plane have completed inspections on an initial batch of 40 planes. The Federal Aviation Authority will next review the findings of the inspections to determine whether the Boeing drafted procedures are enough to return the 171 parked MAX 9s back into service. The Wall Street Journal reports that cancer rates in the U.S. for many common cancers, including prostate, melanoma, and breast cancer, are all on the rise. Another worrying sign, colorectal cancer in those under 55 years old is increasing too. While the news isn't good on cancer prevention, the silver lining is that the cancer death rates have dropped by 1/3 since 1991. The reasons for that: lack of smokers, decline in earlier detection, and better treatment. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want. Bloomberg, I'm Dan.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 3:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index, Russell 2000. Take your pick, all in the red, but we are off session lows. Let's head right over to the first word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. Here he is, Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Charlie. That's right. U.S. stocks under pressure from the start again today, with the Dow currently down 126 points. S&P's dropped 33, and the NASDAQ is off by 0.8%. The U.S. 10-year yield at 4.1%. Gold is sinking down 23, but oil trading in the green, and Bitcoin is lower by 1.9%. Among the main 11 S&P sectors, all were trading in the red, led by losses in real estate and utilities. And leaders to the upside in the Dow, UNH and Boeing, while Disney fell 3% and led to the downside. After earnings, Schwab fell as much as 7% before paring losses to 1.6%. And in other news, after the merger was blocked yesterday, Spirit Airlines plunged as much as 28% today after falling 47% yesterday. Wrapping things up, Alcoa reports after the bell. Live from the first breaking news desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
Okay, we thank you very much, Bill Maloney. And to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg, type Squawk, SQUA, on your Bloomberg terminal. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home? Honey, please, I'll do the driving. Drive on. Excuse me, I want to drive. It's
the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, we've got just under 18 minutes left in today's trading session. We've talked a little bit about what we've really seen. What's been significant is the move up in yields once again. That 10-year, Charlie just breaking down the markets, but just a reminder, 10-year at 410 and that 2-year note 434. Of course, more sensitive to expectations of what the Fed may or may not do.
Yeah, that front end of the curve, seeing some.
Love it when you do that.
You love that. You know, I got to be honest. Walking in here 3 years ago, I knew nothing about the yield curve. And Carol Masser has taught me everything. So.
I hope I haven't taught you everything, because we have much more people on this. But it's great to watch the bond market. Like, we talk so much about the equity side of things, but what goes on in fixed income, whether it's corporate debt, can tell you so much about the health of certainly, corporations at large specifically, or more broadly in our economy.
Well, on that note, we're pleased to welcome in Joanne Bianco, investment partner and client portfolio manager at Bond Blocks. It's an ETF issuer focusing on U.S. fixed income options, government corporates, and the like. Full transparency, the funds track Bloomberg indices. Joanne joins us on Zoom from Chicago. We should note Bond Blocks has $2.6 billion in assets under management, growing quite a bit over the last couple of years.
Yeah, and let's start there. Joanne, first of all, great to have you here with Tim and myself and here on Bloomberg across our platforms. You guys, though, can we talk about assets? From what I understand and reading in, you guys have more than doubled, I believe, assets in the past year. Do I have that right?
Yes, you have that right. We've launched 20 ETFs and more to come. And we've actually seen a lot of growth in terms of our assets under management. Yes, we have more than doubled our assets in the past year and a half.
Well, so let's go with that. Recent fund flows, or where that money is coming in organically in terms of maybe some of the existing investors or new money. Where is it going? Talk to us about fund flows, because I can feel like it tells us so much in terms of the investor psyche.
We're definitely seeing fund flows across the curve in our treasury products. We have 8 products across the curve, starting with a 6-month target duration ETF out to a 20-year target duration ETF. And so we're seeing, we had a lot of demand for our shortest products last year, but we're seeing continued demand in the short products, but people also going out the curve a bit.
How much are they going out? 3-year, 5-year?
We're seeing moves across the curve. We're seeing more of the flows nearer term, but there are some very long investors too. We're also seeing a lot of flows into our high yield funds. We have credit rating category funds rated double B, single B, and triple C. And actually, we've been really very happy to see that we're getting more flows into our triple C rated product within the last few months.
Okay, so that's where the flows are. That's where the money's going. What are your own expectations when it comes to the yield curve? Where do you think yields peak? Let's say 10-year. Where do you think the 10-year? Do you think the 10-year has peaked when it went to 5 just a couple months ago?
I do think that's the peak. I'm not to say that we don't think that rates could go back up from here, but I would be surprised to see a 10-year greater than 5% again in this cycle.
And that fits in with what you're thinking about for the U.S. Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, in terms of, we've seen it, the story. Everybody was so aggressive in what they thought the Fed was going to do late last year. And then, of course, there's been like, wait a minute. And that started late last year, too. At the end of last year, people were kind of dialing back those bets. And we continue to see that to some extent. What is your expectations for what the Fed does, the U.S. Central Bank?
Yeah, well, we don't think that, we've never been as optimistic as the market has been, especially recently. When the Fed is telegraphing 3 rate cuts for this year, we don't see a reason to telegraph more than that. So, we're not surprised that people are starting to dial back their bets in terms of recent days.
Are you thinking that, what's changed for you? I know what's changed in terms of the data, but it did seem like investors really got ahead of themselves when, after the last meeting, the dot plot essentially showed 3 cuts this year. Investors were pricing in 6 cuts. Between that meeting and now, what changed?
Not a lot changed. Maybe it's just, the market did get ahead of itself and was overly optimistic. And, they've been overly optimistic for about 1.5 years now.
So let's talk about high yield, right? That was your top pick in 2023, continues to be so. Is it because of what we'll get from the Fed, or at least some easing? What's your expectations or thinking around that?
It's primarily due to the higher income generation that you can get from high yield. Yields are still elevated, and we also have still very supportive fundamentals. We're entering 2024 from a strong fundamental backdrop for high yield corporations, even the lowest quality ones. So that's different this time around. It's not to say that we couldn't see some softness from here, but we're just at this point, we think it's very supportive of high yield earning an attractive return this year.
Is it industry specific? And I'm just, because I bring up our concerns about certainly commercial real estate, office real estate in particular. So I'm just curious, is it when you look at high yield industry specific?
Well, I like to look at industries and also at the credit rating category breakdown. So we have ETFs that are rated double B, single B, and triple C. And so investors can either dial up or dial down their risk based upon their view of the outlook for economic conditions in the coming year. So if they're more worried about more softness in the economy, then they could invest in double B corporates. And if they're less worried, then they can invest in single Bs or triple Cs.
Any new ETFs for 2024?
We're going to have some new ETFs for 2024. We're going to have some ETFs in the investment grade side. We're very excited about that. Stay tuned.
Is there a fixed income spot Bitcoin ETF play for you?
I don't know if that's like that.
I'm kidding.
Those really run counter to one another. Fixed income and spot Bitcoin.
Really?
Nothing with Bitcoin should have income.
Is there a high yield component to it? I don't know.
Word, right?
Looking forward to seeing what you guys bring to market, but really fun to hear also in terms of where the investors are plowing money into. So appreciate it. Joanne Bianco, investment partner and client portfolio manager at Bond Blocks. As we said, an ETF issuer focusing on U.S. fixed income options, a variety there, about $2.6 billion in assets under management. She was there on Zoom from Chicago.
S&P down 0.7, NASDAQ down about 0.7, and the Dow down 0.3. This is Bloomberg
Radio.
Business Week.
Jinx.
Your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. The World Economic Forum underway in Davos. Bloomberg Radio is there, and we caught up with Chuck Robbins, the chairman and CEO of Cisco Systems.
Somebody asked me earlier about whether this felt like a normal Davos, and I think it seems busier, first of all, this year. And I do think there's a lot more tangible business discussion, I think, going on than you might see normally. But there's also a lot more to talk about with all the complexity going on. You've got elections, you've got the Middle East situation, you've got Ukraine, you've got are we going to cut rates? You've got AI. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. There's just so much to talk about.
And you can hear more of the conversation on the Surveillance podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. And, of course, Bloomberg Terminal users can find plenty of Davos coverage under NI Davos. Cisco Systems, by the way, trading lower today, a part of a broader sell-off down by about 0.5%. Amazon will partner with Diamond Sports as part of a restructuring agreement. It's the largest owner of regional sports networks. Networks looks to emerge from bankruptcy. Diamond owns 18 networks under the Bally Sports banner. Verizon Communications is writing down the value of its business services division by $5.8 billion, a sign of the company's declining enterprise operations. Also today, after the bell, we will be hearing from companies that include Kinder Morgan, Alcoa, and AIG. And those are some of the top stories that we're following for you at this hour, and this is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, just about 4.5 minutes left in today's trading session. In just a moment, we're going to head over to our TV colleagues, talk about the trade today. And on that, one of the stocks that's really a standout is Charles Schwab.
Yeah, not in a good way,
No.
actually. Yeah, we're seeing Charles Schwab fall. It was down as much as 7%. When the company reported numbers. It reported declines in profit, new asset and deposits. This as it navigates a tumultuous year of interest rate hikes that dented the firm's balance sheet. Initially, shares were down as much as 7%, but shares now, just checking on the terminal, down just a little over 1%.
Listen to this. Schwab said net new assets fell 48% to $66.3 billion in the fourth quarter, while net income also dropped by almost half. Those are tough numbers to put out if you are the CEO or a member of the C-suite. Bank deposits in the period declined 21% to $290 billion, and the company's total retail brokerage accounts fell short of analyst estimates at 34.8 million. There was some commentary on the CEO.
Yeah, this was really interesting. Okay,
right?
Walt Bettinger, the company's CEO, said, "No one at Schwab is kidding themselves that everything is perfect right now," end quote. He continued, quote, "Perhaps it was the most challenging in my time at Schwab, certainly the most challenging since the bursting of the internet bubble in 2000.
Listen, we've known this story. We talked about a lot in 2023 that like a lot of either banks or financial firms that out there, their funding costs went up a lot last year, right? Or have since the Fed began very quickly raising rates. That hiking cycle was a short one, like it happened very quickly. And so if you're a financial firm and you're borrowing money or lending money, like your whole equation, your cost equation is really turned upside down and it can hurt.
And then there's the customer behavior that happens when rates do go up. And that's something that Schwab struggled with last year. As rates went up in high yield savings accounts at other banks, and we saw interest rates rise and you could buy bonds that yielded 5%.
Right.
Investors took their money from Schwab and deposited it elsewhere where they could get those higher rates.
Or a money market.
Money market, yeah, exactly.
Simple as that. So it really impacted things, and it's been a story really of 2023, and it's, I guess, finding its way hopefully forward. Certainly, that would probably be its mission here in 2024. So we'll see, but it's been really tricky. Speaking of that, we've got some buying here at the close, but we're still down across the board. Really a risk-off trade when it comes to the equity side of things. This is, as we've seen, really rates move up all along the Treasury curve. Do not go anywhere. We're going to count you down to the close on this Wednesday. Over to our TV side, Beyond the Bell. It starts right now.
Beyond the Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostick alongside Scarlett Fu. We're counting you down to the closing bell, and here to help take us beyond the bell. It's a global simulcast with our friends Carol Masser and Tim, the Angel Stenivek. Welcome to our audiences across all of our Bloomberg platforms.
Where's the halo?
Television, radio, originals, and YouTube. Carol Masser.
We are everywhere. Based on that halo in the heavens as well, I guess, or
It's
something
gone away.
like that.
What'd you do to him?
The sunset.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, you didn't like it, so we got rid of it.
It was blinding.
It's you. It's you. Hey, listen, I heard you guys just talking NASDAQ, not NASDAQ, forgive me, but Hong Kong and China. We got some rough numbers again, kind of overnight. Concerns about whether or not China gets its story, but you're looking at the NASDAQ Golden Dragon China Index.
There you go.
Underperforming. My gift to you guys, down 2.6%.
Can I just
today.
say, we were talking about you earlier. I don't know if you actually watch our show, but
we're busy when your show
But
is
we
on.
actually
That's the sad
avoided
part.
talking about, we mentioned the K-Web, we mentioned FXI, we mentioned all the other insane, but we stayed away from that because that's Carol Masters. They should just rename that index the Carol Masser Golden Dragon Index.
I think it's an important thing. I've been watching it my whole career in business news, and I still feel like, definitely.
It's been around that long?
All right.
We used to write on tablets and stones.
I was going to say,
So rough,
I was going to talk a
man.
little bit about the strong economic data.
I mean, you walked into that.
We got earlier today, Scarlett. And I was thinking, this isn't necessarily what the Fed wants to see, but I don't actually believe that. I think the Fed understands that this is the economy. I think it's investors who priced in 6 rate cuts this year don't want to see this strong economic data. The Federal Reserve, we learned from the most recent, rate cut expectations, the dot plot, 3 rate cuts. It's still this disconnect between what Fed officials at least thought a few months ago versus what the market is pricing
And they
in.
take pains to remind everyone that they're okay to, sit where they're at and wait and see to make sure that inflation is headed towards 2%.
All right, well, the clapping and cheering starts as is mandatory here as we get the closing bells in.
Please
New York.
clap.
Right across the screen, yeah, absolutely here. I'm not sure what they're clapping for. Right across the screen for a second straight day, the Dow Jones Industrial Average down about 94 points or about 0.2%. The S&P 500 down about 27 points or about 0.6%. A similar percentage decline for the NASDAQ Composite. And your laggard once again here was the Russell 2000, which actually down for a 4th day, down 0.7%.
All right, so let's get to digging a little bit deeper into the S&P 500. Guys, clearly a risk-off trade on the equity side of things as we saw rates tick higher. 403 names to the downside, Scarlett. 99 actually gaining ground today, and we had 1 unchanged.
Yeah, and if you look at the sector breakdown, it's pretty clear what the bias is. It is to the downside. You have only 2 out of 24 groups finishing barely in the green. Insurers up by 0.2%. Healthcare, equipment, and services up by 0.1%. Household and personal products unchanged. Your big laggards here are real estate investment trusts, autos and components, and utilities. 2 of those 3 groups, of course, very rate sensitive.
All right, folks, let's get to some of the individual gainers. There's a couple names in the healthcare space that actually were outperforming today. Humana above it, the number 4 gainer in the S&P 500, finishing the day off its highs, but still eking out a 2% gain. Oppenheimer reiterating its outperform, maintaining a $630 a share price target. Stock closing just below $448 a share. Stock was down about 10% last year. Meantime, you had B of A removing it, along with Boeing, from the firm's US 1 list, which is intended, I'm reading in terms of what this means, intended to represent a collection of the best investment ideas that are drawn from the universe of buy-rated US listed stocks covered by B of A analysts. The firm did keep buy ratings on both, but I just thought it was interesting. But Humana, an outperformer. United Health, also an outperformer today, up more than 1%. Today defeated an appeal by a class of more than 200 doctors. What they were saying is that the insurer wrongly refused to pay them facility fees for office-based surgeries. Nonetheless, a win for United Health. Oppenheimer, too, out on this, reiterating its outperform rating and maintaining a $610 price target. Stock closed at $524 and change. What's up?
Can I add one to your list?
Please, but I'm not done. But go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Continue.
No. Go. This.
Maybe great minds think alike.
This is a group effort. I'm curious where you're going to take us.
Well, I was looking at Sinclair Broadcasting.
That is my third gainer, but go ahead.
So great minds do think alike.
Okay, or something. But 18% gain.
Maybe
but I thought this was interesting in all seriousness. We talk about Diamond Sports and basically a company that, for the most part, was looking to kind of wind down, if you will. And now a bit of a rescue here coming out of bankruptcy with not only, of course, the debtors potentially agreeing to a program, but I thought more interesting, Amazon taking a minority stake in this.
There were a lot of moving parts to it. I will say that Benchmark came out and called this settlement the stock's biggest overhang. So, I mean, it was up, 18%? It is, a small cap, micro cap, if you will, but nonetheless, an outperformer in today's session. Anything else you want to say?
Did you get Maple Bear in there?
No, but I did get DWAC. So I'm going to take everybody there.
We're back to DWAC?
It's just interesting.
Is that how you
She
say
can't
it?
help herself.
I don't know. DWAC, I don't know. Digital World Acquisition Corp. It's the SPAC, right? They're trying to kind of in a hard way take over Trump's media and tech group for more than 2 years. They did jump, what was it? Oh, it was up 18%.
3% now.
No, 28% at its highs, just up about 3% by the end of the day. Investors kind of betting on maybe another Trump presidency, so maybe that would be a good thing with it. But I just thought it was an interesting story.
Okay, well, I got some interesting stories about the decliners that I chose
It was an
for the
embarrassment
day.
of riches for you, Tim. I mean, you had so many to choose.
I know, but I only chose 3 because I follow directions. But I do want to talk about Apple. It was the worst performer on a points basis in the S&P 500. Interesting story around Apple today, of course, was that the company was, a judge ruled that the company had to stop selling its Series 9 and Ultra 2 smartwatches with the blood oxygen features in the U.S. Essentially, it's a ruling that means that Apple has to stop selling the watches with the oxygen measurement feature while an appeal of the ban plays out. So they're appealing this, but Apple thinks that could last a year or more. Interestingly, shares were down about 0.7% when this news came out, and they moved higher. So, I'm not saying that the stock moved as a result of this, just worth checking in on shares of Apple when this news hit. Charles Schwab shares fell as much as 7% when the company came out with its most recent quarter today, but down 1.4% on the day, 1.3% on the day. Schwab last year was swept up in the regional banking crisis as interest rate hikes eroded the value of its investments. Check out this quote from the company's CEO. Said that it was the most challenging year in my time at Schwab, certainly the most challenging since the bursting of the internet bubble in the year 2000. Schwab said that it reported declines in profit, new assets, and deposits. And then worth checking in on shares of Spirit Airlines after yesterday's decline of around 50%, close to 50%. Spirit Airlines falling again today, down more than 22% after yesterday's decline. This, of course, after a federal judge yesterday blocked the JetBlue Spirit deal. JetBlue shares were down about 9% today. We saw budget and regional carriers fall too. Frontier, Sun Country, Allegiant, Mesa Air Group all falling after they were kind of swept up in this deal not working out for these two companies.
Let's check in real quickly with what happened in the yield space. Most of the activity was on the shorter end of the curve here, 13 basis points higher on your 2-year yield. You got to go back to at least June or July of last year to find a one-day move like that on the 2-year yield. The rest of the curve did move higher, but you see the lopsidedness of it. A 10-year yield up about 4 basis points, your 30-year yield only up about 2, and that is the Fed repricing there. Of course, that 2-year yield most sensitive to any changes in monetary policy, and maybe they are finally starting to rethink, investors are finally starting to rethink those 5, 6, 7 rate cuts that they had priced into this market for 2024, dialing that back just a little bit, and more importantly, pushing out the start of it by a bit as well.
Did you guys notice that the VIX is now at 14.8? It's at a 2-month high.
Yeah, it was trading up
Slowly,
above
quietly,
15 for a good portion of the day.
Has made its way higher.
Remember when it was didn't it hit 40 way back when?
Yeah, it does that every now and then, Carol.
It does, everyone. I always wonder, how do you guys read the volatility index? I mean, how do you think about it? Those moves.
Well, I mean, I think it's significant. I don't know if the VIX is as a reflection of the stock market volatility as it used to be here. But if you overlay that with what you can see in the options market, you definitely see that the volatility is elevated, or the expectations of volatility, I should say, are elevated.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of volatility, for all the moves that we've seen in the equity market, in the first couple of weeks of the year, net, we're only down 0.6% on the S&P 500 from the start of the year. A little perspective.
If you're a small cap, though, you're down 5.6%.
Yeah, this is. I do wonder if, as we get deeper in the year, whether we are going to be kind of talking about a tale of two cities when it comes to the market again. Not necessarily saying we're going to go back to that Magnificent Seven dominating everything, but there's clearly been a little bit of a splinter here over the last few days.
Yeah, remember the January effect? I mean, they definitely got front run in December because that market breadth expanding at the end of December when people realized that there was more to the world than the Magnificent Seven. That has faded now, and I think a lot of people are waiting for earnings season to see if the numbers justify what they've seen.
Yeah, the other thing is we talked with Steve Matthews and Michael McKenzie of Bloomberg, and what was interesting is they reminded us, we've got a Fed meeting January 31st. We're going to go into a blackout week next week. You've got PCE next Friday. We've seen that trending lower. Do we continue to see that? That could be, as we go from data point to data point, that's going to be a big one.
But we only care about March's meeting, right?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Well, I mean, nothing's priced in for January. Yeah. I don't know why Tim is
care what Powell
denigrating
says
the
in
January meeting, which is just as important. Remember, Tim, every meeting's alive.
Every meeting is important. You're right.
Every meeting's a live one.
Except for January.
Except for January. All right, that's a wrap. All right, our cross-platform coverage, wrapping up the markets here on this Wednesday. Radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. Folks, we will see you all tomorrow. All right, everybody, as you know, the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum is underway. Our Bloomberg editorial team, it's on the ground. They're catching up with global leaders from all walks of life. And on that, interviewed at Bloomberg House in Davos by Francine Lacroix in front of a live audience was the president of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde. They talked about a lot of global issues and then turned to the United States. And what Madame Lagarde said, as much as what she didn't say, some would say, spoke volumes.
The U.S. election. Yeah, let me have some coffee. How worried are you about the U.S. election? It's for the American people to decide what they want with their politics, with their government, with their future. But obviously, we are all concerned about it because the United States is the largest economy, the largest defense country in the world, and has been a beacon of democracy with all its upside and downside. But this is what they should be considering. And of course, we cannot interfere with their choice. It's their choice, and that's the beauty of democracy.
That was the president of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, a little earlier at a Bloomberg House in Davos, being interviewed by Francine Lacroix. Well, U.S. politics, geopolitics overall, certainly top of mind. Just ask our next guest, who's also in Davos and is looking at it from the perspective of global trade. It's all in a new report, Geopolitics and the Geometry of Global Trade. Olivia White is senior partner at McKinsey & Company, also director of the McKinsey Global Institute. Olivia joins us on Zoom from Davos, Switzerland. Good to have you with us this afternoon, or evening for you, Olivia. Appreciate you certainly staying up a little later there to spend some time with us. Give us an idea of what the tone of Davos is like this year. What's the conversations that you're having on the ground, and what's sort of the vibe that you're feeling?
Yeah, I would say it's unsettled, but there's a mix of optimism linked to some of the stuff that's going on in the world. I mean, it's difficult to have a conversation here without Gen AI coming up and what that might mean, for example, for productivity. But there's the obvious real uncertainty about what's happening in the world at the country level and then at the geopolitical level, and what does that mean? And linked, of course, to our report.
Well, so let's talk about that report, because you guys have note in it, historically, and I'm quoting from it, historically, value chains have shifted gradually, and recent years are no exception. No economy has gained or lost more than an annualized 2 percentage point share of global exports in any value chain since 1995. Despite increasing tariffs and restrictions in recent years, that has not changed. But since 2017, the geometry of economies' connections has been shifting. Why is that word geometry so important? Play that out for us. Explain it.
You know, if you think about what mattered for trade over the past, call it 25 years, we talked a lot about trade intensity. How much does an economy trade? We talked also, to some degree, about the geographical distance. So just how far does stuff travel? But in this new world, we also have to worry about other quantities. And the other sort of two dimensions of our geometry that we look at are a geopolitical distance. How aligned are countries that are trading with one another, and are countries shifting to closer aligned economies or not? And then also concentration, because concentration can be a measure of risk and supply chain risk, put aside geopolitics.
Well, let's stick with the idea that we're talking about the U.S. here, and that the President of the United States has a lot to do with how a country thinks about trade. And kind of want to put the same question to you that our own Francine Lacroix put to Christine Lagarde a little bit earlier in the day, which is, how should we think about trade under a second Trump administration? What would happen?
Well, let me talk about what's happened from 2017 between 2017 and now, and how the geometry of U.S. trade has shifted. So we are trading across smaller geopolitical distances. So our distance of our geopolitical trade during that period has gone down by 10%. Following the introduction of the tariffs in 2018, our trade with China dropped most, particularly in electronics, but across a whole range of value chains. At the same time, the distance of our trade went down a little bit. So that's a little bit of nearshoring, but not a lot. And that's a bit of shifting to Mexico. Interestingly, that is not predominantly because of shifting from China to Mexico. That's because of shifting transport equipment, autos, from Japan to Mexico, and also some agriculture from ASEAN, Southeast Asia to Mexico. And then the final thing I'll note is, if you talk about de-risking, the diversification of our trade has actually gone up. So less trade with China, more trade with a whole host of other countries.
So is there, a net here as you talk about this? I mean, is it good? Is it bad? I mean, is there a takeaway? I'm curious, you guys work with a lot of companies, right? Advising and so on and so forth. Olivia, do you guys say that this, geometry of economies, these connections and how they've been shifting, is it good or bad?
Well, look, big question about where we go in the future and, what would be good, what would be bad. And one thing that we look at is, what about a future world in which we all start trading with people who are geopolitically closer to us? So less trade between the U.S. and China, for example, more trade between the U.S. and Europe and other closer aligned economies. What does that look like, and what does it look like instead if we all diversified our trade a bit more? And what we find is that is a decided trade-off at the global level and to some degree at the economy level. So the more you try and trade over the long term with your geopolitically aligned economies, the more concentrated your trade tends to become, and vice versa. So if you want your trade to be more diverse, less concentrated, perhaps less beset by certain kinds of risks, well, you've got to trade with more folks. And that the latter, the diversification scenario, also tends to be better for growth. So, Carol, I'll leave you and the listeners to what's good or bad, what's one really trying for. But if what you're after is a sort of broad resiliency and growth,
right.
Just trading with geopolitical partners or more aligned economies is probably not what you're after.
But this stuff is really fragile, as we're seeing right now in the Red Sea, Olivia. And I'm wondering how closely. Well, obviously you're watching it closely, but I'm wondering how much of a risk attacks on ships that are trying to get through the Red Sea, if you're looking at that as something that's temporary or something that's like a permanent shift in the way that companies are thinking about getting goods through that area.
Look, I'll say to some degree, fragile's in the eye of the beholder. When you focus just on the trade part, there's obviously a much broader conversation about what's happening in the Red Sea. But when you think just about trade, the fact of the matter is the system has managed to adjust, sort of be self-healing rather well. And this is true, for example, in the way that trade was diverted after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's true even for what were real supply chain blockages during COVID. We managed to ship actually more through the system than ever we had before. So the fact is that the web of trade as we have it today, right now, actually can accommodate some real shocks and sort of buffer them. But make no mistake, these are all scenarios that people are thinking about. You asked me about what people are thinking about here. They're thinking about these scenarios. And all the companies that are operating across the globe really are thinking through these scenarios that dictate what their trade will look like in the future.
I think it's interesting too when we are in an earnings season that's really just getting underway, and you think about the C-suite at multinationals or global companies and what they've got to think about. Like, this is something based on what you're saying is that they've got to kind of consider this in terms of how they think about who they're dealing with. It's not just countries, but companies, certainly, and what they're dealing with. It's just another big issue that they've got to potentially deal with. So appreciate it, Olivia. We know it's later there, but we're really glad it's a timely discussion and glad we could bring it to our audience.
Thanks for skipping a party to hang out with us. I thought Davos was all about the parties,
Are you
Olivia.
still going?
He's next. Thanks a lot.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Good.
Olivia White, Senior Partner at McKinsey & Company, Director of the McKinsey Global Institute, on Zoom from Davos, Switzerland. We do hope she gets a nightcap. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 4:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Lots of earnings after the closing bell, and we've got you covered. The aluminum producer Alcoa reported a quarterly loss of 56 cents a share. That did beat the average analyst consensus estimate for a loss of 78 cents. After ours, Alcoa, little change right now. Did pop higher initially as we got the early headlines, but right now, looking at Alcoa shares, just moving to unchanged. Also reporting after the close of trading, pipeline operator Kinder Morgan, it reported distributable cash flow per share for the fourth quarter that missed the average analyst estimate. After ours, we do have Kinder Morgan shares trading lower, down now by about 0.9%. Another down day on Wall Street, 2 in a row on the S&P 500 index, has been down in 3 of the last 4 sessions. Today, we had stocks joining in risk assets as bond yields climbed on speculation that the Fed will be in no rush to cut rates as the economy shows signs of resilience. S&P down 26, a drop today of about 0.3%. Dow Industrials lower today, declining 94 points, down by about 0.25%. NASDAQ lower by 88, drop there of 0.6%. 10-year yield 4.10%, with a 2-year that's yielding 4.33%. Gold down $22 the ounce, 2005, drop of 1.1%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.6%, 72.82 a barrel. Earlier in the day, U.S. Bancorp reported earnings that beat analyst estimates as the bank benefits from elevated interest rates. Also reporting earlier today, Citizens Financial, they're based in Providence, Rhode Island. That stock advanced after reporting earnings that beat estimates. Again, recapping, stocks lower, S&P down 26, a drop of just about 0.6%, 10-year at 4.10%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. All right, everybody, you know this. We got an update today on how U.S. consumers are doing, courtesy of a strong December retail sales report. In fact, they're doing kind of well.
Yeah, opening up
they
their
were
wallets
in
or swiping their credit cards or buying now and paying later, however you want to put it.
Not so good.
Data like that continue to temper back expectations of a Fed rate cut sooner rather than later. Fed swaps now show the probability of easing as soon as March, dropping to around 50% compared with 80% on Friday. Carol, also key, what workers at companies are doing when it comes to business travel and corporate card use.
It's another metric, right, that tells us about the health of the overall U.S. economy, or maybe even global economy. Hey, Jennifer Petty knows all about this. She's head of global card and comprehensive payables over at Bank of America. She joins us on Zoom from Charlotte, North Carolina. Jennifer, nice to have you here on Bloomberg Business Week. We did get that retail sales number, so we know kind of the U.S. consumer certainly last 3 months of the year and December doing okay, bet more than okay. What are you guys seeing when it comes to corporate card spending specifically? Because you guys have a great vantage point and window into all of that.
Sure. So we're actually seeing growth, and we've seen growth since the pandemic. There are reports out that said 2024 was going to be the year where we saw spend growth or more travel growth that would really align to what we saw in 2019. We actually saw that in 2020. And then 2022 to 2023, we saw growth at 26% in travel spend. So we think that's going to continue, and we definitely think that that shows, you know, our clients are traveling, they're going to see their clients, they're meeting together, and we think we'll continue to see growth, so similar to what you're reporting.
All right, so you've seen spending on corporate cards and corporate card clients since the pandemic. So help me understand. So 2022, and how did the subsequent years, or 2022 to 2023, how did that compare to the year before? How did it compare to pre-pandemic? I just need a little context and perspective here.
No problem. So in 2022, we actually saw the spend that we saw in 2019. So post-pandemic, 2022, we saw pre-pandemic spend actually come to fruition. So a lot of pent-up demand to actually go out and travel because we weren't able to travel for some time. And then from 2022 to 2023, we actually saw 26% growth year to year. So we definitely anticipate that to continue into 2024.
Now, I'm wondering, thinking back on how you anticipated 21, 22, and 23, because What we try to do is understand accuracy of projections here. And if we were talking to you last year at this time, no doubt, Jennifer, we'd be asking you about companies pulling back, fears of a recession, and your expectations there. So how did your expectations last year and the year before, how were they met, exceeded, or not met? Just so we have some context.
Yeah, I think they were exceeded, because we definitely heard the same things that you were just mentioning, and the trends and the pullbacks, et cetera. But we didn't see that. I think some of that was really pushed by wanting to get in front of customers. Some of the industries that we saw growth were higher ed, biopharma, software companies. Some of our larger corporate clients that are around the globe were the ones that we really saw driving that additional spend. But also, we know that many companies are getting together for strategy meetings, et cetera, because many of their workers may work from home. So getting that travel together and getting to client meetings or getting to strategy meetings, we really saw that uptick as well, just based on the different workforces that we saw at home or in the office.
So was it more transactions, or was it just the dollar amount went up? Because that plays into the inflation story, which we all know so well in those years, was really pushing prices or the cost of services much higher.
Right, and it's a little bit of both, right? It was pent-up demand to start to travel, and those meetings definitely happening, but we know that fuel and airplanes increased airline tickets. And so we definitely saw an inflationary impact on the price of those tickets, really driving higher spend. So you're absolutely right.
Okay, so what are, we're hearing a little bit from different data that we're getting. We got that Gusto data a little earlier that we talked about with our TV team that did payroll processing for 300,000 small businesses and saw bonuses were down. Does the tightening of the belt when it comes to wages, is that reflected in how you anticipate spend, or does that have to be looked at completely separate in terms of how businesses are thinking right now of an employment story rather than one about the economy?
So I think it all comes down to the expense that the company is willing to spend, right? So it does play into it, but I definitely think that companies realize that travel, in many cases, in some industries, is still important to sell, to meet with clients, and to really drive meetings that really set the strategy. So I definitely think that helps or plays into that number. A lot of the things, though, that we are also seeing, some of the growth is shifting from consumer cards, right? Many employees maybe were using their consumer cards. There's a lot of best practices being rolled out to say, please use your corporate card. It enables a digital experience. It's much more like consumer experiences today. There are apps available. You can put your card in your mobile wallet. So giving that consumer experience is also growing the travel spend amount because we're seeing our clients are more willing to use corporate cards than consumer cards. And that really makes a better environment, but really drives the spend as well. So back to the earlier point, it's not necessarily more travel, but it's definitely higher cost, and it's putting more spend on a corporate card versus using a consumer card for corporate travel.
Hey, two things. When it comes to travel, are you noticing, though, in that corporate spend on travel that it's less overseas, more domestic, like to keep the costs down? Anything that you're noticing in that might be interesting to our audience?
We definitely see trends where we're seeing more in-country, so domestic travel, but we're definitely seeing the global travel as well. So I think more time will tell, because I think none of that travel was really happening, and so we're seeing it on both sides, but maybe more time will tell us.
Is there a different way that this money is being spent versus pre-pandemic? Are clients being entertained in a different way? Are people traveling less because they have Zoom meetings so they're able to do sort of different things with that money? How would you characterize that?
One example that I would say is there's a new way of using travel cards, and that is virtual travel solutions that we're able to offer customers. And again, as customers really try to do more with less, as they try to digitize more, they're looking for more ways to put payments on digital means. And if you think about utilizing corporate travel cards, they're always used for employees, but there was never that comfort in maybe providing it to a contractor or providing it to someone that you're recruiting, that you're wanting to travel in and talk to them about a new opportunity. And virtual travel solutions enables even more opportunity to use a travel card, but it's virtual, it's used in a wallet only, and it's very defined on what it can be used for. So I think we're really seeing corporates challenge us to provide them ways that they get to use cards in a different way.
Hey, Jennifer, just got 30 seconds left here. In terms of new accounts being opened, what can you tell us about that and what it tells us about the kind of economic outlook or economic environment? Just got about 20, 25 seconds. Forgive me.
Sure. So different than a consumer, you know, when we're looking at new clients and new card holders, a little bit different, but we're definitely seeing travel spend grow, new accounts being opened, and new ways of using digital accounts for travel.
All right. Okay, so it sounds like more new accounts versus net closings, correct?
Correct.
All right, good stuff. Hey, Jennifer, thank you. Jennifer Petty, she's head of global card and comprehensive payables at Bank of America, joining us from Charlotte, North Carolina. I do want to mention a headline: Rishi Sunak overcoming Tory rebels to win a key vote on immigration. Of course, we're talking about the Prime Minister of the UK.
Hey, let's get a check on latest world and national news. We got Dan Schwartzman from the Bloomberg 1130 newsroom right here in New York. Hey, Dan.
Hey, Carolyn, Tim, a Maine judge pausing the decision of a state election official to remove Donald Trump from the presidential primary ballot. The judge wants to allow the U.S. Supreme Court time to rule on a similar case ongoing in Colorado. Superior Court Judge Michaela Murphy denied Trump's request for a stay in the proceedings, though, instead sending the case back to Maine's Secretary of State with the instructions to wait till a decision has been rendered in that Colorado case before modifying or upholding the decision to bar Trump. As we know, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin was released Monday from a hospital after 2 weeks due to complications from prostate cancer surgery. The Pentagon waited days to inform President Biden about Austin's hospitalization and even longer to disclose his cancer diagnosis. Those decisions set off alarm bells at the White House and on Capitol Hill. At a briefing today, Pentagon Press Secretary Air Force Major General Pat Ryder provided an update on Austin's condition.
The Secretary continues to recuperate at home. He does have planned physical therapy, as I highlighted there in the Secretary or his doctor's statement. And so in terms of travel, no travel scheduled in the immediate future, but again, we'll keep you updated.
That's Pentagon Press Secretary Air Force Major General Pat Ryder. Cabinet members in the Biden administration are set to meet their Mexican counterparts on Friday for meetings focused on the number of migrants crossing the southern border. The visit is a follow-up to when U.S. officials visited Mexico at the end of December. During that trip, both countries agreed to work towards reducing the record number of crossings to a level more manageable. The issue of border security has risen to the forefront of the upcoming presidential election, as well as a sticking point in President Biden's funding requests, including much-needed aid to Ukraine. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Dan Schwartzman, and this is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 4:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Lots of earnings after the close of trading, and among those reports, Discover Financial Services. It reported total deposits for the fourth quarter that did beat the average analyst estimate. However, shares are now trading lower. Discover down by roughly 6%. Discover's Financial's fourth quarter net charge-offs came in at $1.30 billion. Estimates there $1.29 billion. Charge-off, an accounting term, which means the creditor believes that money can't be collected. Again, we've got Discover trading lower now by just about 5.5%. Turned out to be a down day on Wall Street with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all retreating today. Bond yields climbed on speculation the Fed will be in no rush to cut rates as the economy shows signs of resilience. Joanne Bianco is investment partner and client portfolio manager at Bond Blocks, and she was a guest right here on Bloomberg Business Week.
We've never been as optimistic as the market has been, especially recently. When the Fed is telegraphing 3 rate cuts for this year, we don't see a reason to telegraph more than that. So, yeah, we're not surprised that people are starting to dial back their bets.
And you can hear more of that conversation on the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. Stocks lower across the board today. S&P 500 index down for a second day, declining 26 points. By the way, it is lower in 3 of the last 4 sessions. S&P right now at 47.39, down today by 0.6%. The Dow dropped 94. It was down 0.3%. The NASDAQ Composite Index down 88, a decline of 0.6%. 10-year 4.10%, with a 2-year that's yielding 4.36%. Spot gold down $22 the ounce to $2,005, down 1.1%. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.7%, $72.91 a barrel. Again, recapping stocks lower. S&P down 26, a drop there of 0.6%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Charlie, have you played around with ChatGPT?
First got it.
Turn
your mic on,
maybe
Charlie.
ChatGPT could help you with the mic. There,
Well, don't get me going on ChatGPT. But when it first, when our family first discovered it last October, November, and of course,
that's when you should have invested in NVIDIA too.
Well,
Where's your family on that?
No, Tim, that was 10 years ago. But that's neither here nor there.
Right.
But the point is, on ChatGPT, we were messing around with it. We were looking for menu items that we could use using old refrigerator items. So we put it together. ChatGPT came up with something, and then we decided to get creative. Show us a picture in the image of Van Gogh. Guess what? ChatGPT did exactly that. Those ingredients, like a Van Gogh painting. And then we said, show us the menu in the prose of Shakespeare.
Hey, Charlie,
and again, it delivered.
We got a show to do.
You asked a question.
I'm just kidding.
I love that, Charlie.
I do too.
That's
it does
great.
seem like ChatGPT is great with art.
Yeah, it does. You know what?
What?
That's like a perfect segue for our next guest,
All right.
because it turns out that the best part of chatbots could be just around the corner when it comes to analyzing what's in images.
Images, right? It's a big deal.
That's what they're trying to do.
She's got a story about it. Let's just get to her. Rachel Metz, Bloomberg News AI reporter, writes about what OpenAI rival Anthropic is building, and she joins us on Zoom from San Francisco. I mean, Rachel, you were listening. You probably heard Charlie's story. I mean, it's right. It's like a lot of it so far has been image-related, right? That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's getting increasingly popular as people are getting more and more used to using these chatbots. They're thinking about, well, what else could I do with this? What could I do besides typing to it? Like, could I give it an image and say, what's in this image? What kind of dog is this? Or like, what's the difference between these 2 images? That sort of thing.
So talk a little bit about that, because image generation is certainly a big part over the last 18 months of AI. And, a lot of these images go viral, right? The Pope in the puffy jacket.
Right.
And, I don't know. There's
Wait,
some
that
other ones
wasn't
too.
real?
That wasn't real. The puffy white coat. And that's like, that's an AI-generated image.
Sorry.
But what's the flip side of this, Rachel? The idea that, these AGI tools could actually be used to describe stuff to us.
Well, let's be clear. This is not AGI. That would be referring to artificial general intelligence, which is something that doesn't yet exist. But what we're talking about is giving a large language model, which is kind of AI model that is used to power something like Anthropic's Claude or OpenAI's ChatGPT, giving it the ability to look at an image and tell you something about the image. And if you could do that in a decent way, you could find some really good uses for it. There's a company called Be My Eyes, and this was like the first company that OpenAI talked about as using their sort of like image analysis feature when OpenAI rolled it out last year. I thought that was actually a really interesting idea. Be My Eyes helps people that have issues with vision to understand what's in front of them or what's in a picture. And this is the kind of thing that could be really helpful for something like that, for instance, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, real use case, right? Like you really, like that, we totally get. Hey, we do want to highlight your story on Anthropic and why we care about this company and what they're up to. Because it sounds like they're a little bit behind, but they're trying to play catch up. So what's up with them?
So what we noticed by looking through some of the code for their Claude chatbot, which is something that anybody could do on the internet with Chrome developer tools, is that they've got some references to adding an image analysis feature, which is something that they might be rolling out soon. You know, it's not totally clear when it's going to come, but that would be something that would put them in league with some of the most powerful chatbots that are out there right now, like ChatGPT, Google's Bard. Those companies already have those capabilities. Claude is a chatbot from Anthropic, and they always position themselves as like a little bit more cautious, you know, a little bit, perhaps that in some ways means slower to roll out certain cutting edge features. So it might make sense that they'd take a little more time to do something like this. But we will probably see it soon.
And started by former employee. No, I interrupted.
Yes.
But started by former
No,
employees.
I was going.
No, but started by former employees of OpenAI, which is why we kind of are interested in what they are doing in their approach.
Yeah, well, Rachel, talk about that a little bit, because Anthropic calls itself an AI safety and research company. That word safety is front and center. You use the word cautious as well. How are they positioning themselves as being distinct from OpenAI?
One of the things that they talk a lot about is what they call constitutional AI. So they say basically we have built like kind of a bunch of rules that they expect their AI models to follow. And this is something that I'm sure they'll iterate on over time. But from the start, they sort of position themselves as being very, very safety focused, perhaps more or differently, at least safety focused than OpenAI. And as you mentioned, they're people that came from OpenAI. I mean, they've only been in existence for like 3 years, and it is a company that has raised billions of dollars and is worth billions of dollars. And I just find that like fascinating that could happen so quickly.
Well, we love talking to you because I feel like, you know, I just go to NI space AI on the Bloomberg and there's tons of stories that come through. We know AI dominated the Consumer Electronics Show. We know last year we were all in on AI and we're expecting it to be the same thing. I saw a story today about SEC Chair Gary Gensler calling for more international coordination to ensure that AI won't harm global financial stability. There's so much coming at us. Tell us is there something top of mind or a few things that are top of mind here? Here we are on January 17th, the beginning of still this new year. What is it that you kind of focus on to kind of figure out, you know, the exaggerated versus like the real use cases or the reality of AI, this next level, if you will?
Oh gosh, that is a really good question. I mean, some of it is I think about like what would I want to do with this, not as a reporter, but just as like a consumer, and you know, I try to come up with simple tasks for these kinds of tools. I try to play with them as much as I can. OpenAI has its GPT store that they recently rolled out. Before they rolled it out, I was making my own GPTs because I wanted to know, like, what the heck would I do with this? Thank you. I'll send you guys a link. I made a GPT. It's not available in the store, but it is available to people with the link, and it is a GPT called Cocktail Unicorn that comes up with magical unicorn cocktails.
That is awesome.
That is,
but you know, we only have 20 seconds left, but what that does is it gives you an idea of what companies can do when creating their own GPTs, right, Rachel?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of interesting things. There are bad things and good things that can happen with this technology. And I think we just need to try a lot of things and sort of right now and sort of experiment and see what happens.
And by cocktails, you mean like drinking cocktails, right?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Just check it, just check. That is a real use case.
Yes, that is a real use case.
Check that box. Rachel Metz.
They were really disgusting, mostly.
You are so much fun. Rachel Metz and Smart, AI reporter here at Bloomberg News.
Your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Apple will have to stop selling its Series 9 and Ultra 2 smartwatches with a blood oxygen feature in the U.S., suffering another legal setback in its patent dispute with Massimo Corp. U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit today declined to grant Apple a longer pause on an import ban of the devices imposed by the U.S. International Trade Commission. Well, we were just talking about artificial intelligence here on Bloomberg Business Week. Dan Ives is an analyst with Wedbush Securities. And on surveillance this morning, he says what's next for Apple is AI. And he told our Tom Keene that is why he has got a street-high $250 price target on the stock.
The bull case, this will be a $4 trillion market cap, we believe, by the end of this year. And remember, AI, there's $0 given for AI in Apple's valuation. That's why this is a get that popcorn ready in the Keene household when they come out with that AI announcement in June.
And you can hear more of that conversation on the Surveillance podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. Apple today down for a second day, 182.68 on AAPL. A drop today of 0.5%. Again, Ives has got that 250 price target. Verizon Communications is writing down the value of its business services division by $5.8 billion, a sign of the company's declining enterprise operations. And Verizon shares lower by 1.1%. Those are our top company stories at this hour, and this is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. Let's get a check on the latest world and national news. For that, we go to Dan Schwartzman from the Bloomberg 1130 newsroom in New York. Hey, Dan.
Hey, Carol and Tim. Judge Lewis Kaplan threatening Donald Trump with expulsion from his courtroom. The former president repeatedly ignoring Kaplan's warnings to keep quiet as writer E. Jean Carroll testified in the federal court trial to determine damages, if any, Trump would owe her for remarks made back in June of 2019. A jury had found that Trump sexually abused Carroll back in 1996, then defamed her in October of 2022 when denying her claims. Well, speaking of Trump, a Maine judge has paused the decision of an election official to remove Trump from the presidential primary ballot. The judge wants to allow the U.S. Supreme Court time to rule on a similar case ongoing in Colorado. Superior Court Judge Michaela Murphy denied Trump's request for a stay in the proceedings, instead sending the case back to Maine's Secretary of State with the instructions to wait till a decision has been rendered in the Colorado case before modifying or upholding the decision to bar Trump. After weeks of attacks on Red Sea shipping, the U.S. is putting the Houthi militant group back on its list of global terrorists. Bloomberg's Nathan Hager reporting from Washington.
This move is a reversal for President Biden. He took the Houthis off the list of specially designated global terrorists early in his presidency to try to ease the humanitarian crisis in Yemen after years of civil war. But this recent string of Red Sea attacks tied to the war in Gaza has changed the game for the White House. A senior administration official says the designation will take effect in 30 days. That's to give the U.S. time to shape sanctions on the Houthis that won't harm ordinary Yemenis. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
Thanks, Nathan. The super PAC supporting Ron DeSantis, Never Back Down, has begun a round of layoffs, although the number of those losing their jobs is unclear. The layoffs come despite DeSantis' campaign claiming they have a path forward. The group had spent heavily in Iowa, where DeSantis finished second, but by 30 percentage points to Donald Trump. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Dan Schwartzman, and this is Bloomberg. Back to you, Carol and Tim.
Thank you so much for that update, Dan. Really do appreciate it. Hey, Carol,
yeah.
I want to go to some of the most read stories on the Bloomberg terminal. It's something that you and I like to do, see what people are clicking on and reading. This one really caught my eye, and it's about how fleeing donors and leadership shakeups at elite U.S. colleges, such as Harvard University, University of Pennsylvania, that's actually elevating risks for tens of billions of dollars of highly rated debt, according to a new report from our own Bloomberg Intelligence.
Right. Remember that you've got all of these elite universities, and they often issue debt to build different things on their campus, right? This is how they do it. And what's interesting is, in our Bloomberg Intelligence team of Joel Levington and Michael Dodo, they are basically warning bond investors and credit rating companies to consider rethinking their laissez-faire attitude toward university debt after congressional anti-Semitism probe and other scandals have upended campuses. They put out a research note today. But you think about it, right? Major donors are pulling back. That is so important in terms of those endowments and money to the schools. Could they lose their tax-exempt status? That would be a biggie.
That would be huge.
And then if you start to see maybe, students pull back in terms of applications, you already are seeing management upheaval. There's a lot of things going on that could maybe impact certainly all of that debt.
I understand this, but I think there are some questions that need to be asked in the context of what's happened recently. One, is this a permanent shift in the way that these donors are thinking about these universities? Two, how much of a hit are they going to take? We'll find out. The fiscal years, end in June, I believe, for a lot of these universities. So we're going to find out about, how much less they've actually brought in. And our own Janet Lauren wrote a story about smaller donors actually pulling back as well. And, those boosters pulling back too, which arguably can be, just as hurtful to these as those big ones.
You know how I kicked off the show and said it was October?
Yeah.
When we get